Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles. Tonight we are diving deep into the forgotten corners of the wizarding world with 100 obscure Harry Potter theories. Settle in, get comfortable. There's nothing here you need to follow closely, nothing to remember, no plot to keep track of. Just a long, quiet walk through 100 small ideas about a world you already know, told slowly, in the dark, while you let everything else go. These are theories. Some of them come straight from the books if you read carefully. Some live in the gaps the story left open. None of them require you to stay awake. If you drift off somewhere around the 20th one and wake up at the 60th, that's the whole point. The castle will still be here. The voice will still be going. You can rejoin whenever you like. So close your eyes, let your shoulders drop. We'll begin where most of the magic in this world actually hides, which is not in the great battles or the famous wands, but in the small forgotten objects that everyone walks past. One small thing before we begin. If this kind of quiet helps you sleep, subscribe, and it'll find you again. That's all. Now back to the castle. The first idea is about a piece of old parchment. The Marauder's map shows a great deal more than most people give it credit for. It draws every person inside Hogwarts as a small labeled dot, moving in real time across a perfect plan of the castle. And here is the part worth pausing on. When Barty Crouch the Younger spent a whole year disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, drinking Polyjuice potion every hour to wear another man's face, the map never once called him Moody. It always knew him as Crouch. The map saw past the potion. It saw past the stolen face, and the magical eye, and the wooden leg, and the gruff, borrowed voice, and it printed the truth underneath. Which means the map does not read appearance at all. It reads identity. Somewhere in the enchantment those 4 students laid down as teenagers, there is a piece of magic that knows who a person truly is, no matter what skin they happen to be wearing. They were boys playing a prank, mapping the secret passages so they could sneak out for mischief, and somehow, almost by accident, they built a thing that cannot be lied to. Think about how much that quietly explains. It explains why the map was so dangerous in the wrong hands, because it could expose anyone hiding behind any disguise. It explains why it could be trusted absolutely in the right ones. A name on that parchment is not a guess and not a label. It is a fact about a soul, written plain for anyone holding the map to read, which makes a scrap of old paper made by 4 schoolboys one of the most honest objects in the entire castle. The second idea concerns a pair of cabinets and a boy who got lost between them. There were 2 vanishing cabinets. One stood for years in a quiet corridor of Hogwarts, broken and forgotten. The other sat in Borgin and Burke's, the dark little shop in Knockturn Alley. When they worked, they were linked. Step into one, and you would step out of the other, no matter the distance. Draco Malfoy spent his entire 6th year repairing the Hogwarts cabinet so he could open a door between the school and the shop, and let the Death Eaters in. But years before that, a Slytherin boy named Montague was shoved into the broken Hogwarts cabinet by the Weasley twins. He vanished, he was gone for days, and when he finally reappeared, he was barely coherent, having nearly suffocated inside a toilet, and he said something easy to overlook. He said he had been able to hear things. He could hear Hogwarts around him, and at the same time, faintly, he could hear the inside of the shop in Knockturn Alley. He had been suspended between the 2 cabinets, in some narrow nowhere place that belonged to neither location, listening to both worlds at once. It was Montague's mumbled account, repeated to Draco, that told Draco the cabinets were still connected. A bully's prank gone wrong became the blueprint for the night Dumbledore died. The third idea is about a cat that everyone hated. Mrs. Norris belonged to Argus Filch, the bitter old caretaker, and she patrolled the corridors like a small grey informant, always appearing the moment a student stepped out of line, always somehow knowing where the trouble was before the trouble had properly begun. Students assumed Filch had simply trained her into a spy, or that he watched the school through her eyes by some spell, a man and his familiar working as one. The likelier answer is in her breeding. Mrs. Norris behaves, in nearly every detail, exactly the way a half-Kneazle behaves. Kneazles are magical cats, highly intelligent, fiercely loyal to the person they bond with, and gifted above all with an uncanny instinct for detecting people who are untrustworthy, suspicious, or up to no good. A half-Kneazle would look almost entirely like an ordinary cat, just a little odd about the face, which is precisely why nobody ever questioned what she was. But it explains the unsettling part of her completely. She was not a normal cat that a clever caretaker had trained into surveillance. She was a creature born with the ability to sense when something was wrong, when someone nearby meant mischief or harm, bonded utterly to a lonely, magicless man who had nothing else in the world, doing the one thing her blood was made to do, over and over, in the corridors of a school full of children breaking rules. Her loyalty to Filch is the loyalty Aneasel gives, total and lifelong, and his fury when she is petrified is the fury of a man whose one companion, the only living thing that ever truly chose him, has been struck down. The fourth idea sits on a shelf in the headmaster's office, and it is older than the school's quarrels. The sorting hat was Godric Gryffindor's own hat. The story the hat itself tells, in one of its annual songs, is that the four founders worried about how students would be chosen after they had died. Each added a portion of their own intelligence and judgment to the hat, so that it could go on sorting the way they would have sorted, long after they were gone. We tend to treat the hat as a wise, fair, impartial judge, a kind of perfect mechanism for placing each child where they belong. But sit with what its origin actually means. The hat does not contain a fair and abstract system. It contains four dead people's opinions pressed into old felt, including all their fears, their grudges and their prejudices. When it weighs a trembling 11-year-old, it is weighing them against the values of Salazar Slytherin, who wanted to keep certain children out of the school entirely, who left in a rage over exactly that question. The hat sings every year about the four houses, and more than once it sings a warning, urging the school to unite, to set aside its divisions before some danger tears it apart, which suggests the hat is still, in some real sense, thinking, still worrying, still carrying the founders' old unfinished argument inside its seams. So every sorting is not a neutral assessment. It is the four founders quarrelling one more time, through a hat, over the head of a frightened child, four long-dead voices debating where the small new person in front of them ought to go. And sometimes, as with Harry, the child's own desperate wish is the only thing that tips the scales away from where those old voices would have sent them. The fifth idea is about sweets, and what they hide. Albus Dumbledore had a famous, almost childish fondness for Muggle sweets. The password to his office was often a sweet: sherbet lemons, acid pops, cockroach clusters. He offered lemon drops to terrified visitors. It made him seem gentle, a little eccentric, a kindly old man with a sweet tooth. And that softness was useful to him in ways he understood perfectly. Behind the twinkling eyes and the candy was one of the most calculating strategists the wizarding world ever produced. A man running plans that spanned decades and required other people to underestimate him. The sweets were a costume, a man who has decided to raise a child towards sacrifice, and to arrange his own murder, and to let the world believe he is simply a benevolent schoolmaster, would find it very convenient to be the harmless old fellow who likes lemon drops. The kindness was real. The sweetness was also armor. The sixth idea is about a room that gives you what you need, and the one thing it will never give. The room of requirement appears only when someone truly needs it, and it shapes itself to that need. It became a bathroom, a training space, a vast cathedral of lost and hidden things. But it cannot conjure food. This is never an accident or an oversight. Food is one of the 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, the rule that says magic cannot create food from nothing. You can summon food that already exists, multiply it, move it. You cannot make it appear from empty air, so even the room, which seems able to provide almost anything, runs straight into that wall. What it can do, endlessly, is hide. The version called the Room of Hidden Things had become a city of abandoned objects, centuries of contraband and shame and forgotten property stacked into mountains, because generation after generation of students needed somewhere to make a thing disappear. The room remembers all of it. It is, in a sense, the guilty conscience of the entire school made into a place you can walk through. The seventh idea is about a man who hated magic and may have had a little of it after all. Argus Filch is a squib, a person born into a magical family who cannot perform magic at all. He lives at Hogwarts, surrounded every single day by the one thing he can never do, watching wave after wave of careless children waste and abuse the gift he was denied, which goes a long way toward explaining the deep sour bitterness that radiates off him. He resents the students, he longs to punish them, he keeps careful records of their offences, and dreams openly of the old days when caretakers were allowed to hang misbehaving children by their wrists in the dungeons. But there is one small, secret, easily missed detail that complicates the obvious picture of him. Filch had quietly ordered a quick spell course, a mail-order program that advertises itself as teaching basic magic to those who have struggled to learn it. And when Harry stumbles on the evidence of it, Filch is mortified, desperate to hide it. Now, a true squib has no magic at all to develop, none by the very definition of what a squib is, so the course should be entirely, hopelessly useless to him. And yet he tried it anyway, in secret, and was ashamed enough of trying that he hid it like a guilty thing, which suggests something sadder and stranger than mere bitterness. Perhaps Filch is not quite entirely without magic. Perhaps he carries the very faintest flicker of it, not enough to ever cast a spell, but enough to make him believe, against all the evidence of his life, that with the right instruction it might at last surface, that he might not be as empty as everyone assumes. He is not a man with nothing. He may be a man with almost nothing, which is worse, because almost nothing is exactly enough to keep hoping on, year after year, in secret, mortified that anyone might ever find out he still hopes. The eighth idea is about a mirror that could have stopped a death. Sirius Black gave Harry a small package before Harry returned to school and told him to use it if he ever needed to speak with him. Harry, not wanting to risk tempting Sirius out of hiding, never opened it. He pushed it to the bottom of his trunk and forgot it. Inside was a two-way mirror, one of a matched pair. Sirius held the other. Speak the name of the person holding the twin, and your face appears in their glass. You can talk across any distance, instantly, privately. Now hold that against the night everything went wrong. Harry believed Sirius was being tortured in the Department of Mysteries. He had no way to check. He could not reach anyone he trusted to confirm it. So he led his friends into a trap, and Sirius died coming to rescue him from a danger that was never real. The mirror was in his trunk the entire time. One word into the glass, and Sirius would have answered from the safety of his own house, and the whole catastrophe would have dissolved. The most painful objects in this story are not the cursed ones, they are the ones that would have helped, sitting unopened. The ninth idea is about an umbrella that is not really an umbrella. When Hagrid was a student at Hogwarts, decades before the main story, he was expelled, accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets, and as part of his punishment his wand was snapped in half. A snapped wand is meant to be ruined, its magic broken, its owner left unable to perform proper spell work ever again. And yet Hagrid, all through the years we know him, carries a large, battered, flowery pink umbrella. And again, throughout the story, strange bursts of magic happen whenever it is in his hand. He gives Dudley a curly pig's tail with a jab of it. He lights fires, sends up sparks, conjures small comforts, performs clumsy, unschooled magic that a man with no working wand should not be able to do. The umbrella is almost certainly concealing the snapped pieces of his old wand, kept together inside the handle, still carrying enough of their broken power to function, roughly and unpredictably, when he needs them to. And Dumbledore, who fought to keep the expelled Hagrid at the school as gamekeeper, who trusted him with the most important tasks, surely knew exactly what was inside that umbrella. He simply chose not to see it. It is one of the many quiet kindnesses running underneath this whole world if you look for them. A half-giant boy, thrown out of school and publicly disgraced for a crime he did not commit, stripped of his wand and his future, was nonetheless allowed, by the deliberate blindness of the one man who believed in him, to keep a fragment of his magic tucked inside something that looks to everyone else like an ordinary, slightly silly umbrella, so that he would never again have to feel entirely powerless, entirely cast out, entirely without the thing that made him a wizard. The umbrella is not a joke. It is a man's dignity, smuggled past the rules by a headmaster who decided that mercy mattered more. The 10th idea is about a small silver device and what it truly does. Dumbledore owned a thing he called a deluminator, sometimes called a put-outer. Click it, and it draws the light from every nearby lamp and street lamp into itself, leaving darkness. Click again and the light returns. For most of the story, it looks like a simple, clever gadget. Then Dumbledore leaves it to Ron in his will, and it turns out to be something far stranger and gentler. When Ron, in despair, had abandoned Harry and Hermione and wanted desperately to find his way back to them, the Deluminator did not give him a map or a light. It carried the sound of Hermione saying his name, and then released a small ball of light that sank into his chest and showed him where to apparate. It does not only take light from rooms, it can take the light from the people you love and give it back to you when you are lost in the dark and lead you home. Dumbledore knew Ron would leave. He also knew Ron would want to return, so he left him the one object designed to bring a person back to the people they belong with. We've reached the end of the first stretch. 10 ideas, all of them about objects, the small forgotten things that turn out to carry the weight. If you're still with me, let your breathing slow down to match the pace of the words. There is no hurry to anything that follows. The next 10 ideas are quieter still. They're about the dead and the ones who stayed behind. The 11th idea asks a question the books never answer out loud. Why are there so few ghosts? In a world filled with violent death, dark wizards, centuries of war, terrible accidents, and ordinary mortality, you would expect ghosts to be everywhere, crowding the corridors, lingering on every old battlefield, and in every ancient house. Instead, they are rare. Hogwarts, ancient as it is, soaked in 1,000 years of history, and surely the site of countless deaths, has only a small handful of resident ghosts, a few well-known figures, and not many more. The explanation nearly Headless Nick gives Harry, when Harry asks him about it after losing Sirius and desperately wanting to believe his godfather might come back, is one of the saddest things in the entire series. A ghost, Nick says, is what remains when a witch or wizard, afraid of death, chooses to stay behind rather than go on to whatever comes next. It is not a reward for a life well lived, and not a punishment for a life poorly lived. It is a refusal, a flinching away from the unknown, a choice made in fear at the very threshold. Most wizards, Nick explains, when they die, simply go onward and do not look back and do not return. Only the frightened ones, the rare few who could not bear to face what lay beyond, remain. And what remains is not really the person at all. It is an imprint, a pale and translucent echo of who they were, locked forever into the shape and the fears of the moment they died, unable to grow, unable to change, unable ever to leave, drifting through the same halls, repeating the same gestures and the same old stories for centuries on end. So the reason there are so few ghosts is, in the end, strangely comforting and deeply sad at the very same time. It is that most people, when the final moment actually comes, turn out to be braver than they ever believed themselves to be. They let go. They go on. The ones who stay behind, the rare lingering few haunting the world, are precisely the ones who, at the very last, could not bring themselves to, and chose instead a kind of frozen half-existence over the unknown, and have been paying for that single frightened choice ever since, drifting and faded, neither fully here nor properly gone. The 12th idea follows directly from that, and it is about the paintings on the walls. Hogwarts is full of living portraits. They move within their frames, they talk, they doze, they argue, they wander from one painting to another to visit friends or carry messages. They guard doorways and gossip about the students. When Dumbledore dies, his portrait duly appears, slumbering at first, on the wall of the headmaster's office, and in time it wakes and continues, in its painted way, to give counsel and direction. It is enormously tempting and enormously comforting to believe that some real part of Dumbledore lives on in that portrait, that the man himself survived, that death did not take all of him. But the magic of wizarding portraits is far more limited and far more melancholy than that hope would like. A portrait captures and holds the learned behaviours of its subject, their characteristic manner, their turns of phrase, their opinions, and the particular way they had of looking at the world, all of it observed and absorbed, while the subject still lived. It is a very good imitation, capable of real conversation, capable of sounding exactly like the person, capable even of offering advice the real person might genuinely have given. But it is not the person's soul. It is closer to an extraordinarily detailed recording that has learned to respond. The painted Dumbledore can act as Dumbledore would act, can say what Dumbledore would say, precisely because it was made, from long observation, to do exactly that. The real Dumbledore, meanwhile, went onward, the same way the rare ghost theory says nearly every wizard does, brave at the last, not looking back. What hangs and speaks in the office afterward is a faithful echo, comforting precisely because it sounds so completely like the man they lost, and hollow at its heart precisely because, however perfectly it imitates him, it simply is not him. The 13th idea is about two ghosts who never speak of each other, and the crime that binds them. The Ravenclaw house ghost is a beautiful, mournful, silent young woman whom the students call the Grey Lady, and who rarely speaks to anyone at all. Her true name is Helena Ravenclaw, and she was the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the 4 founders of the school. In life, Helena was jealous of her brilliant mother, and she stole her mother's most prized possession, the legendary diadem said to grant wisdom to whoever wore it, and fled far away with it, hiding herself and the stolen treasure out of pride and resentment. When Rowena lay dying, longing to see her lost daughter one last time, she sent a man who loved Helena to find her and bring her home. That man tracked Helena down at last and begged her to return, and when she refused him, in a sudden fury he drew a weapon and killed her, and then, overwhelmed at once by horror at what he had done, he turned the weapon on himself. That man is the figure the students know as the Bloody Baron, the grim, frightening, blood-spattered ghost of Slytherin House, who wears chains in eternal penance, and is the one thing in all of Hogwarts that the chaotic poltergeist Peeves genuinely fears. So the two of them, the murdered woman and the man who murdered her and could not live with it, have haunted the same enormous castle for 1,000 years. She drifts, pale and silent and sorrowful, through the heights of Ravenclaw Tower. He rattles his chains far below in the cold dungeons of Slytherin, and in all those centuries they almost never cross paths, almost never speak, almost never acknowledge one another's existence. The whole vast geography of the castle, by accident or by some deep instinct of grief, is arranged to keep them apart, the victim above and the penitent below, sharing 1,000-year afterlife in the same stone walls, and arranging never, if they can help it, to meet. The 14th idea is about a girl who chose where to spend eternity. Moaning Myrtle died at Hogwarts as a student, killed by the basilisk when she opened the door of a bathroom stall, in tears over some cruelty, and met the creature's lethal gaze. She has haunted that bathroom ever since, weeping and wailing, flooding the place, frightening away any living student who tries to use it, until it became known as her bathroom, abandoned to her. But Myrtle is a ghost, and ghosts can move freely about the castle, drifting wherever they please. She is not chained to that one cold, damp, miserable room. She chooses it, returns to it, makes her home in it. And in life she had been bullied without mercy, in particular by a girl named Olive Hornby, who teased her about her glasses and her tears. And there is a story that after Myrtle's death, she did not simply settle into her bathroom at once. First she haunted Olive Hornby, followed her, appeared at her wedding and her family gatherings, tormented her for years, refusing to leave her tormentor in peace, until at last the Ministry intervened and confined Myrtle to the scene of her death. Strip away the comedy of her, the wailing and the dramatics, and what remains is genuinely bleak. A lonely, friendless, bullied child died frightened and crying in a bathroom, became one of the rare ghosts who stay behind out of fear and unfinished pain, and then spent the long centuries of her death, first chasing the girl who had made her life miserable, and then, when that was forbidden her, sitting in the very room where she was murdered, weeping, because it was the one place in all the world that finally completely belonged to her. Nobody had wanted her near them in life. In death, she took possession of the one space no living student would ever fight her to keep, and she has held it, alone, ever since. The 15th idea is hidden inside a celebration. and it suggests that ghosts feel time slipping. Nearly headless Nick holds Death Day parties. He counts the years since he died and marks them, gathering other ghosts in a cold dungeon among rotting food they cannot eat. The detail worth pausing on is that ghosts mark time at all. A being with no future, no growth, no change, still counts the centuries, and there are hints throughout that ghosts experience a slow kind of decay, not of the body, which is already gone, but of self. They become fainter versions of themselves, more repetitive, more stuck. Nick has told the same proud, sad story about his almost beheading for 500 years. The Death Day party is not really a celebration. It is a being who has nothing ahead of him, marking the passage of a time he can never use, surrounded by others in the same condition, performing the rituals of the living, because the rituals are all that is left. The 16th idea is about a doorway, and the voices on the other side, deep within the Department of Mysteries, in a sunken stone amphitheatre like the bottom of an empty pool, stands a very old, crumbling archway, and hanging from the arch is a tattered black veil that drifts and ripples constantly, as though stirred by a wind that no one in the room can feel. Sirius Black, fighting near the dais, is struck by a curse and falls backward through that archway, through the veil, and does not come back, does not reappear, is simply, instantly, gone. And Harry, standing close, can hear something. Behind the veil, just out of sight, he can hear faint voices murmuring, and he becomes convinced that there are people on the other side, hidden just beyond the curtain, and that Sirius is among them, only just out of reach. Luna Lovegood, who lost her mother as a child, hears the voices too, and is calm about it, certain the dead are simply waiting beyond. The ones in the room who have never known loss hear nothing at all, only an old curtain in an empty stone pit. The simplest interpretation of the veil is also the hardest one to bear. It is a doorway to death itself, ancient and one way, and the murmuring Harry hears is the voices of the dead, present and aware, gathered just on the far side of something no living person can cross and return from. They are not gone into nothing, into silence and void. They are right there, only just there, behind a curtain so thin that the bereaved can almost hear them speaking, and the only people in the whole room able to hear them at all are precisely the ones who have already lost someone, and so have learned the hard way how to listen for the dead. Sirius did not vanish into emptiness when he fell. He stepped through a doorway, into a place full of quiet voices, and the door simply does not open the other way. The 17th idea is about a stone that brings back the dead, and why doing so is a kind of cruelty. The Resurrection Stone is one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, the second brother's prize in the old tale. Turn it over 3 times in your hand, and the dead you long for return to you, appearing at your side. But everyone who has ever used it learns the same hard lesson, and the tale built around it teaches that lesson plainly and without mercy. The dead who come back are not truly alive, and they are not truly there. They return cold and distant and sorrowful, separated from the living world, as if by a veil of their own. And the longer you keep them near you, the more it hurts, because you can see them and almost speak to them and almost reach them, but never truly have them back, never close the unbearable distance, never restore what was lost. In the old story of the 3 brothers, the middle brother used the stone to call back the woman he had meant to marry, who had died before their wedding, and her half-presence, there and not there, so close and yet so completely unreachable, slowly drove him mad with grief and longing, until at last he killed himself in order to join her properly, to be with her in the only way the stone could never provide. This is not a flaw in the stone, not a malfunction or a side effect. It is the entire purpose of the stone. In the legend, it was given by death itself to the arrogant brother who sought to conquer it, and death does not give gifts that help. The stone exists precisely to teach a cruel and necessary truth, that the dead cannot really be brought back, that the attempt only reopens and deepens the wound, and that the kindest and wisest thing the grieving can possibly do is let the dead remain at peace where they are. And when Harry at the very end finally holds and uses the stone, he understands all of this completely, in a way the brothers never did. He calls his lost loved ones, his parents and Sirius and Lupin, to walk beside him for only the few short minutes it takes to make the long walk into the forest toward his own death, draws what strength he needs from their nearness for exactly as long as he needs it, and not one moment more. And then he simply lets the stone fall from his fingers into the dark leaves of the forest floor, and he never once goes back to look for it again. He has learnt in those few minutes the exact lesson the stone was made across the centuries to teach, and having learnt it, he sets the stone down and walks on. The 18th idea is about a locket, and how a fragment of a soul learns to hurt you. When Ron carried the locket Horcrux, it changed him. It made him irritable, suspicious, despairing, and when the moment came to destroy it, the locket fought back in the cruelest way it could. It opened, and out of it poured a vision crafted precisely for Ron. A vision of Harry and Hermione mocking him, preferring each other, leaving him behind, every private fear he had ever carried, given a voice and aimed at him. A Horcrux is a piece of a living soul torn off and sealed into an object. That fragment is not inert, it is aware, it is malevolent, and apparently it can read the person nearest to it, find the soft places, and press on exactly the right ones. The locket did not guess. It looked into Ron and saw the boy who grew up the 6th of 7, in hand-me-down robes, always afraid of being the least loved, and it built its attack from that, a torn piece of Voldemort's soul, doing what Voldemort did best, which was to find the thing you fear most about yourself, and make you believe it. The 19th idea reaches back to a tragedy in Dumbledore's own family, and names something the early books had no word for. Dumbledore had a younger sister, Ariana, who died when he and his brother Aberforth were still young men, and for most of the series we are told almost nothing about her at all. Only late in the story does the full and terrible truth come out. When Ariana was just 6 years old, some Muggle boys saw her doing magic, playing with it openly and joyfully the way magical children naturally do, and they were frightened and disgusted by what they saw, and they set upon her and attacked her badly. And whatever they did to that small, defenseless girl broke something deep inside her that never healed for the rest of her short life. After that day, Ariana could no longer control her own magic. It would build up inside her, damned and pressurized and dangerous, and then burst out of her in violent, uncontrolled explosions. Her magic turned inward and destructive because she had become far too afraid of it to ever let it flow out of her normally again. One such uncontrolled outburst killed their own mother. Ariana was kept hidden away in the family home after that, cared for in secret, never allowed out, a damaged and dangerous and shameful secret, until she finally died young, caught in the crossfire of a duel between the very men who should have been protecting her. Now the word for what Ariana almost certainly was did not yet exist when her story was first told in the books, and only entered the world much later, in the related films. An obscurial is a young witch or wizard who, out of fear and trauma and sustained abuse, suppresses their own magic so violently and so completely that the choked-off power turns inward and festers into a dark, parasitic, uncontrollable force that eventually destroys its young host from within. Every single detail of Ariana fits this description exactly, perfectly. A magical child, attacked and traumatized for what she was, who learnt to fear and choke down her own power until it curdled, and who was slowly destroyed from the inside by the very magic she could no longer safely release. And this means that the greatest, wisest, most carefully controlled wizard of his entire age grew up in a house with a little sister being torn apart from within by suppressed magic, watched it happen powerless to stop it, blamed himself bitterly for it, and carried that raw, unhealed wound silently for the whole of his long and brilliant life. The endlessly careful, endlessly controlled, never quite revealing man we meet was shaped, in the deepest and most private part of himself, by a little sister who could not contain what was inside her, and died of it while he stood by. The 20th idea closes this stretch by gathering the others together. There is a spectrum of staying behind. Look at all the ways the dead linger in this world. Ghosts, the rare frightened ones who refuse to go on. Portraits, echoes of behavior painted while the subject lived. Photographs whose figures wave and move. The voices behind the veil. The half-real figures the resurrection stone calls up. The fragments of soul sealed in Horcruxes. Each is a different distance from true life and true death. A ghost is more present than a portrait. A portrait is more present than a photograph. The stones returned dead are somewhere stranger than all of them. What the world seems to be telling us, across all these forms, is that death is not a single locked door, but a long corridor, and beings can become stuck at different points along it. Most walk all the way through. A few stop. The ones who stop become whatever the place they stopped allows them to be. And the whole gentle, sorrowful lesson of it is that the corridor only runs one way, and the wise learn not to stand in it too long. That's 20. If you're still awake, notice how heavy your eyes have become, and don't fight it. The next ideas are about blood and family, the secret relations that run under this whole world, like roots under a quiet garden. The 21st idea connects the hero and the villain by blood through a fairy tale. The 3 Deathly Hallows in the old fairy tale were made by or given to 3 brothers named Peverell. The eldest brother took an unbeatable wand. The middle brother took a stone that recalls the dead. The youngest and wisest took a cloak that hides its wearer even from death itself. Now follow carefully where those 3 objects end up across the centuries. The invisibility cloak passes quietly down through generation after generation of one family until it reaches James Potter and then his son Harry. It is a true, genuine Peverell heirloom, handed down from father to son for hundreds of years, the youngest brother's cloak. The resurrection stone, the middle brother's prize, set into a ring, passes down through an entirely different line, the Gaunt family, who are also, it turns out, descended from the Peverells. And the Gaunts are the direct ancestors of Tom Riddle, who becomes Voldemort. So Harry and Voldemort both descend, distantly, from those same 3 brothers in the tale. They are remote cousins, separated by 600 years of branching family tree, but cousins nonetheless. The boy and the man locked in a war to the death, the hero and the villain, the hunted and the hunter, are, far back along the tangled roots of their lineage, the same blood, and they carry down the long centuries the very objects that once belonged to a set of brothers in a children's story. The whole sprawling saga, viewed from a certain angle, is a family quarrel that simply took 600 years to finally come due. The descendants of the youngest brother and the descendants of the middle brother meeting at last, each unknowingly carrying his ancestors' hallow, to settle something that began with 3 siblings and a road and a river long before either of them was born. The cloak and the stone, parted for centuries, are drawn back together in the hands of 2 distant cousins who have no idea they are kin, and that is the deep, quiet architecture underneath all the spells and the battles. The 22nd idea is about a family that destroyed itself, trying to stay pure. The Gaunts, when Harry first sees them in Dumbledore's collected memories, are a horror to behold. They live in a filthy, crumbling hovel in the woods, violent, half-mad, barely able to function as people, and yet they cling with furious, snarling pride to one single fact about themselves, that they are descended from Salazar Slytherin and carry his ancient blood in their veins. How does a family fall so unimaginably far, into squalor and madness and ruin, while so fiercely guarding something they consider so precious and so noble? The answer lies in the guarding itself, to keep the bloodline pure, to keep Slytherin's blood undiluted by any lesser stock. The Gaunts married within their own family, generation after generation, cousin to cousin, close relation to close relation, refusing to let outside blood in. Centuries of that relentless inbreeding hollowed them out from the inside, breeding instability, violence, cruelty, and a steep, accelerating decline in both their magic and their minds. By the time we meet them, in Marvolo Gaunt and his wretched children Morphin and Merope, the long pursuit of purity has very nearly extinguished the family entirely, leaving only poverty, brutality, and broken people, clutching an heirloom ring and a locket, and the increasingly hollow claim of a glorious ancestor. And from this dying, broken inbred line came Tom Riddle, the future Voldemort, which is its own bitter and perfect joke. The family's obsession with pure blood, carried to its logical and ruinous extreme, produced as its final flower the very man who would go on to murder and terrorize an entire society in the name of blood purity. The Gaunts valued their blood so completely that they poisoned it almost out of existence, and the last thing that poisoned blood produced was the greatest champion blood purity ever had. A man who was himself, by the end, barely human at all. The ideology consumed the family that held it most fiercely, and then produced its own ultimate believer from the wreckage. The 23rd idea is about a choice the villain made without realizing what it cost him. The prophecy that set everything in motion did not name Harry. It spoke of a boy born as the 7th month dies, to parents who had thrice defied the Dark Lord. Two boys fit that description exactly, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom. Both were born at the very end of July. Both had parents who had stood against Voldemort and survived 3 separate times. The prophecy, as it was spoken, could have meant either of them, and gave no way to tell which. It was Voldemort who decided. He heard a partial account of the prophecy, considered the 2 possible children, and chose to believe it meant Harry, the half-blood boy so like himself, rather than Neville, the pureblood. And in choosing Harry, in going to the Potter's house that night and marking Harry with the attempt to kill him, Voldemort made the prophecy about Harry. He selected the enemy the prophecy had only gestured at. Had he gone to the Longbottoms' house instead that night, Neville might have been the boy who lived, marked instead, and the entire rest of the story would have bent down a different road. The prophecy was never fixed fate. It was a vague and double-edged possibility, and Voldemort, by acting on it, by choosing which of 2 infants to fear, hardened that loose possibility into destiny with his own hands. He was not the victim of a prophecy, he was its author. He heard a riddle that pointed at 2 children and chose himself which one to turn into his doom. And there is a terrible irony in the fact that the great believer in his own special destiny wrote that destiny himself the night he picked the wrong child to be afraid of. The 24th idea is a piece of furniture that records a family's rebellions. In the gloomy House of Black hangs an enormous family tapestry, centuries old, embroidered all over in gold thread, with the entire sprawling family tree, every name and every branch. And scattered across its surface are ugly scorch marks, small burned holes where faces and names used to be, where someone has taken a wand and blasted a relative out of the family record entirely. Each one of those burns is a person who was, at some point, struck off the family tree for committing what the family considered an unforgivable act by the cold standards of that proud, dark, pure-blood house. Sirius himself is burned off for running away from home as a teenager and rejecting everything his family stood for. His uncle Alphard is burned off for the crime of leaving the runaway Sirius some money. Anyone who married a Muggle or befriended the wrong sort of people or expressed sympathy for Muggle-borns, or simply refused to hate in the way the family demanded they hate, was scorched out of existence with a flick of a wand. So the tapestry is not only a record of who is related to whom, read instead by its burns, by its absences, by the holes rather than the names. It becomes something else entirely, a map of every single act of conscience and rebellion the family ever produced across the generations. Every scorch mark marks somebody who, at some moment, chose to be a better and kinder person than their relatives wanted them to be, and was erased for it, blasted off the cloth, and out of the family memory as punishment. The holes in the tapestry, the gaps and the burns the family meant as marks of shame and exclusion, are in truth the family's honor roll, if only you know how to read the thing backwards. Every place the gold thread is burned away is a place where someone, once, was brave enough to be good, and was cast out for it, and the ruined patches are not the family's disgraces at all, but its only redemptions. The 25th idea is about an absence that looks like a rule, but is really a fear. There do not seem to be any Muggle-born students sorted into Slytherin. Across the whole series, every Slytherin we ever meet who mentions their blood is either pure-blood or half-blood, and the house is famous, above all else, for prizing blood purity and producing the wizards most contemptuous of Muggle-borns. It is easy and natural to assume that there must be some rule about it, that the Sorting Hat will simply not place a Muggle-born child into Slytherin House. But there is no such rule, none at all. The Hat sorts purely by temperament, by ambition and cunning and resourcefulness, and the burning desire to prove oneself, qualities that have absolutely nothing to do with the blood in a person's veins. A Muggle-born child could possess every one of those Slytherin traits in abundance. So why the conspicuous absence? The likeliest answer is not a rule but a wound, the slow work of self-selection and fear. Every Muggle-born child arriving at Hogwarts has heard, by the time they finally sit beneath the hat, exactly what Slytherin is reputed to be. They have heard that it is the house that hates people like them, the house that despises the Muggle-born, the house that produced Voldemort and most of his Death Eaters, the house where a child like them would be sneered at, isolated and despised for the circumstances of their birth. So they do precisely what Harry himself did beneath the hat. They beg silently and desperately not to be placed there, and a child who pleads hard enough is, as we know, heard and heeded. The empty space in Slytherin, where the Muggle-born students should be, is therefore not a wall that the school deliberately built to keep them out. It is a wound that the house's own poisonous culture inflicted upon itself, a reputation so toxic and so frightening that the very children who might one day have entered it and changed it from within learn to flee from it in terror before they have so much as walked through the great doors. Slytherin keeps itself pure not by any rule, but by being so cruel for so long that the people who could redeem it run from it on sight. The 26th idea quietly rearranges who is related to whom across the whole society. When a child is born to magical parents but has no magic of their own, that child is a squib. And squibs cannot attend Hogwarts and cannot truly live as part of the wizarding world. There are strong hints throughout the books that many of them drift away, or are quietly sent away, into the Muggle world to make what lives they can among people who do not know magic exists. Now follow that single fact across the generations, slowly, and watch what it does to the whole architecture of blood that the wizarding world is so obsessed with. A squib who goes to live among Muggles, marries a Muggle and has children. Those children are raised entirely as Muggles, with no knowledge whatsoever of magic, of Hogwarts, of the world their grandparent came from. But the magical blood is still there in the family, present but dormant, sleeping in the line. And generations later, that dormant magic can resurface, can suddenly reappear, and a child is born into a perfectly ordinary Muggle family, who can, to everyone's astonishment, do magic, and that child is called Muggle-born. Some Muggle-borns, in other words, are not new to magic at all, not the fresh first sprouting of it in a non-magical line. They are the distant descendants of forgotten squibs, the family magic simply reappearing in a line that lost it long ago and forgot it ever had it. This quietly dissolves the entire pure blood argument from underneath, pulls the foundation right out from under it. The supposedly clean, bright line between wizard families and Muggle families is not clean at all, and never was. It is one single tangled population, with magic flickering on and off down the long centuries, surfacing and submerging and surfacing again, and the people who hate and fear Muggle-borns most viciously are very often, somewhere back along their own carefully guarded family tree, directly related to the very people they despise. The blood they are so proud of and the blood they so revile are, in the end, the same blood, divided only by which generation the magic happened to skip. The 27th idea gives the hero's family a long and gentle history that has nothing to do with war. The Potters are treated, by the snobbier old families, as not quite top tier among the ancient wizarding houses, and yet they are clearly an established line with money and a famous heirloom passed down through the generations. Where did they come from? The family traces back to a wizard named Linfred of Stinchcombe, who lived centuries ago and was a gifted and good-natured maker of potions and remedies. His neighbours called him the Potterer, fondly, for his habit of pottering about with his strange cures and concoctions, and over the long years that affectionate nickname shortened and settled into the family name Potter. The family fortune began with his medicines, including early versions of remedies still sold in the wizarding world long afterward. So the name Potter does not come from anything grand or martial. It comes from a kindly old man who spent his days making things that helped people feel better, and was teased affectionately for it by the village that loved him for it. Far back behind the boy who lived, behind all the prophecy and the war and the famous scar, there is a healer, a fixer, a man who pottered about trying to ease other people's pain and ask nothing much in return. The whole line begins not with a warrior or a conqueror, but with someone whose deepest instinct was to make people well, and you can feel that thread running all the way down the centuries to a boy who keeps throwing himself, again and again, between his friends and the things that would harm them. The Potters were never the proudest or the purest of the old families. They were, from the very start, the ones who wanted to help. The 28th idea is about a teacher who collected people the way others collect debts. Horace Slughorn ran what the students called the Slug Club, an informal little circle of the pupils he judged most promising, most well-connected, or most likely to grow up to be important and useful. He invited them to cozy suppers, gave them his warm attention and his patronage, and kept carefully in touch with them long after they left the school. On the surface, it looks like simple vanity, a flattered and flattering man, enjoying the reflected glow of talented young people, collecting them the way some people collect autographs. But watch closely how the Slug Club actually functions over the long years, and something colder and cannier appears underneath. The students Slughorn cultivates go on, as he intended, to become powerful, well-placed and useful, scattered through the ministry and the press and the great families, and Slughorn maintains a quiet, patient web of contacts, who all feel, gently, that they owe him something, who will take his letter, answer his request, do him a small favor, send him a gift of his beloved crystallized pineapple. He is not collecting friends, not really. He is building, slowly and deliberately across decades, an insurance policy made out of other people's success, a vast network of obligation and goodwill that he can draw upon whenever he should ever need a favor, a safe house, a quiet word in the right ear, or simple protection. And when the dark times come, and he must go into hiding from the Death Eaters who would force him to serve, it is precisely this web of grateful former students that shelters and conceals him, passing him from safe place to safe place. Slughorn understood, long before most people ever do, a quiet truth about surviving in a dangerous world. The safest thing a person can possibly own is not gold, and not power, and not a grand name, but a great many people, scattered everywhere, who all quietly feel that they are in your debt, and who will therefore, when the moment comes, be glad of the chance to repay you. He spent his whole life accumulating that particular kind of wealth, one promising student at a time, and in the end it was the only thing that kept him alive. The 29th idea is about a boy raised under the shadow of a fear. Neville Longbottom's parents were aurors, brave and skilled, and they were tortured into permanent insanity by Death Eaters, who wanted information they would not give, and so Neville was raised instead by his formidable, demanding grandmother. As a small child, Neville showed almost no sign of magic at all. He was clumsy, forgetful, frightened, soft, and his family began to worry, seriously and openly, that he might be a squib, with no magic in him at all, a quiet shame and disappointment for such a proud old wizarding family. There is a story, told almost as a joke, that his great-uncle Algy, trying to force the hidden magic out of him, kept startling Neville and endangering him in the hope of provoking a magical reaction, and once dangled him by the ankles out of an upstairs window, and only when Neville was accidentally dropped and bounced harmlessly down the garden like a ball did the family rejoice, because the bounce finally proved he had real magic in him after all. Sit for a moment with what that childhood actually was, underneath the comedy of the telling. A boy whose parents are alive but utterly gone, kept in a hospital ward, never knowing him, never to know him. A boy raised by people who feared he was broken and not enough, who tested him by deliberately endangering him, and who openly celebrated the moment he very nearly died because his survival happened to prove he was magical enough to keep. The wonder then is not that Neville was a timid, trembling, hopeless first year, melting cauldrons and forgetting passwords. The genuine wonder is that this particular boy, raised from infancy on the unspoken suspicion that he was a disappointment, that he was not enough, that he might be worthless, grew up to be the one who stood up alone and unarmed to Voldemort in front of everyone, and who drew the sword and struck the head clean from the last living Horcrux, ending it. He was never the squib his family feared he might be. He was, all along, quietly, the bravest of every single one of them, simply waiting for the moment that would finally call it out of him. The 30th idea closes this stretch with the saddest fact about the villain, fixed before he was even born. Tom Riddle Sr. was a handsome, wealthy muggle, the son of a prominent local family, and Meropa Gaunt, the downtrodden, abused, half-broken daughter of the dying Gaunt line, loved him desperately and hopelessly from afar. She was plain, beaten down by her cruel father and brother, and she had no chance with the handsome young squire by any honest means whatsoever. So she used magic. Most likely she brewed a love potion and fed it to him secretly over time, and under its powerful influence Tom Riddle Sr. abandoned his old life, scandalized his family, and ran away with the strange poor girl from the woods, and in time a child was conceived between them. Neville Longbottom's parents were aurors, brave and skilled, and they were tortured into permanent insanity by Death Eaters who wanted information they would not give. And so Neville was raised instead by his formidable, demanding grandmother. As a small child, Neville showed almost no sign of magic at all. He was clumsy, forgetful, frightened, soft, and his family began to worry, seriously and openly, that he might be a squib, with no magic in him at all, a quiet shame and disappointment for such a proud old wizarding family. There is a story, told almost as a joke, that his great-uncle Algy, trying to force the hidden magic out of him, kept startling Neville and endangering him in the hope of provoking a magical reaction, and once dangled him by the ankles out of an upstairs window, and only when Neville was accidentally dropped and bounced harmlessly down the garden like a ball, did the family rejoice, because the bounce finally proved he had real magic in him after all. Sit for a moment with what that childhood actually was, underneath the comedy of the telling. A boy whose parents are alive but utterly gone, kept in a hospital ward, never knowing him, never to know him. A boy raised by people who feared he was broken and not enough, who tested him by deliberately endangering him, and who openly celebrated the moment he very nearly died because his survival happened to prove he was magical enough to keep. The wonder then is not that Neville was a timid, trembling, hopeless first-year melting cauldrons and forgetting passwords. The genuine wonder is that this particular boy, raised from infancy on the unspoken suspicion that he was a disappointment, that he was not enough, that he might be worthless, grew up to be the one who stood up alone and unarmed to Voldemort, in front of everyone, and who drew the sword and struck the head clean from the last living Horcrux, ending it. He was never the squib his family feared he might be. He was, all along quietly, the bravest of every single one of them, simply waiting for the moment that would finally call it out of him. The 30th idea closes this stretch with the saddest fact about the villain, fixed before he was even born. Tom Riddle Sr. was a handsome, wealthy muggle, the son of a prominent local family, and Merope Gaunt, the downtrodden, abused, half-broken daughter of the dying Gaunt line, loved him desperately and hopelessly from afar. She was plain, beaten down by her cruel father and brother, and she had no chance with the handsome young squire by any honest means whatsoever. So she used magic. Most likely she brewed a love potion and fed it to him secretly over time, and under its powerful influence Tom Riddle Sr. abandoned his old life, scandalized his family, and ran away with the strange poor girl from the woods, and in time a child was conceived between them. But a love potion does not, and cannot, create love. It creates only obsession, a hollow, chemical, counterfeit imitation of love, a forced fixation with nothing real behind it. And at some point Merope, pregnant now, and perhaps hoping foolishly that he might choose to stay for the sake of the coming child, or that real feeling might have grown in him after all, made a fatal decision. She stopped giving him the potion, and the very moment it cleared from his system, Tom Riddle Sr. came back to himself, looked around in horror at the situation he found himself trapped in, at the strange woman and the unborn child, and he fled, abandoning Merope and the baby utterly and without a backward glance. So Voldemort was conceived under a false, manufactured love and born into the world only after that false love had collapsed completely and his father had walked away. He was, quite literally, brought into being by a potion rather than by any affection, created through coercion rather than care, the product of a spell and not a feeling. The man who would go on to spend his entire life unable to understand love, unable to feel it, openly contemptuous of it as the weakness of lesser people, began his existence as a child conceived without any love at all, in the truest and most literal sense. It is the one single thing about Voldemort that is genuinely not his fault, the circumstance of his own conception, which he could not choose and could not change, and it is, quietly, the very thing that doomed him, and through him, doomed everyone. A boy made without love grew into a man who could not recognize it, and so could never defend himself against it, and so was destroyed by it in the end. That's 30 ideas behind us. We're roughly a third of the way along now, and there's nothing left to do but keep walking and let the words carry you down. The next stretch is about the rules of magic itself, the quiet machinery underneath everything, the laws nobody on screen ever stops to explain. The 31st idea is about the limits of what magic can make. You can do almost anything with magic in this world, and yet wizards still farm, still cook in kitchens, still buy food at markets, still go hungry in hard times and lean years. The reason is a deep rule of their magic called Gamp's Law of Elemental Transfiguration, which lays out 5 things that magic simply cannot create out of nothing. Food is one of them. A witch can multiply a loaf of bread she already has, summon a feast that already exists somewhere in a kitchen, or transport a prepared meal across a great distance in an instant. What she cannot do is conjure bread out of empty air, because food made from genuine nothing would be food made from genuine nothing, and the magic flatly refuses to allow it. This one rule quietly explains the entire economy and texture of the wizarding world. It is why Hogwarts has enormous kitchens staffed by an army of house elves cooking real ingredients in vast quantities, rather than a headmaster simply waving his wand at empty golden plates and filling them. It is why poverty and hunger can exist at all in a world full of immensely powerful wizards. Magic can move wealth around, multiply what you already possess, transform one thing into another, but it cannot create the basic raw stuff of survival from thin air, and so the wizards, for all their dazzling power over the world, remain bound to the same hard ground that the rest of us are bound to. They can turn a teacup into a tortoise and back again. They cannot make a single mouthful of real food from nothing, and that limitation, more than any other, keeps their magical society tethered to the ordinary necessities of growing, cooking, buying, and going without. The 32nd idea is about how the ministry catches children doing magic, and how the system fails the children it should protect. Underage wizards are forbidden from doing magic outside of school, and the ministry enforces this with something it can detect at a distance. When magic happens near an underage wizard's home, the ministry knows, and a stern warning letter arrives almost at once. But there is a serious flaw built into the very heart of this system. The detection registers that magic occurred in a particular location. It does not apparently register who actually cast it. In Harry's second summer, the house elf Dobby performs a hovering charm in the Dursleys' kitchen, dropping a pudding on a guest, and it is Harry who receives the official warning. Harry who is accused of breaking the law. Harry who is threatened with expulsion from Hogwarts for a spell he did not cast and could not have stopped. Harry did nothing. The ministry simply detected magic at his registered address and assumed, automatically, that the underage wizard living there was responsible. For a child who lives among muggles, with no adult wizard in the house to vouch for him or take the blame, this is genuinely dangerous. Any stray magic, anyone else's spell cast nearby, any accidental burst, any visiting elf, could see him blamed, punished, and potentially cast out of the only world where he belongs. The trace does not protect Muggle-born and Muggle-raised children at all. It hangs over them as a constant unfair threat, ready to punish them for magic they did not perform, simply because they happen to be the only young wizard the ministry can see in that house. A pure-blood child surrounded by magical relatives can do as he likes, his magic lost in the noise of the adult spells around him. The child alone among Muggles is watched, exposed, and presumed guilty by a system that was supposed to be neutral and is in practice anything but. The 33rd idea is about travel and about all the journeys the ministry could watch but chooses not to. Apparition is the act of vanishing from one place and instantly reappearing in another, the wizard's fastest way to travel. It requires a license. It must be learned with great care to avoid the gruesome injury of splinching, where a part of you is left behind, and crucially, it leaves a trace. Skilled wizards can detect when and roughly where someone has apparated, can feel the disturbance of it in the air. The ministry, with all its resources, could in theory track a great many of these jumps, building up over time a detailed picture of who went where and when across the whole country. In ordinary peaceful times, they generally do not. Apparition is treated as a private freedom, a citizen's right to come and go unwatched, and the ministry leaves it alone. But notice what that restraint actually rests on, and how thin it is. When the ministry falls under Voldemort's control in the final book, that same latent capacity for surveillance is suddenly available to people who will not hesitate to use it. The freedoms of the wizarding world, it turns out, do not rest on laws that make watching impossible. They rest only on the restraint of whoever happens to hold the ministry at any given moment. The tools to monitor everyone's movements already exist, fully built, sitting ready. They sit unused only for as long as the people in charge choose to leave them unused, which, as the story shows with terrible clarity, is a thin and temporary and entirely revocable kind of safety. The wizards believe themselves free to travel unwatched, and they are, right up until the day the wrong people take the offices, at which point they discover that the privacy they enjoyed was never a right protected by anything but the goodwill of the powerful, and goodwill, in dark times, is the first thing to go. The 34th idea is about a promise that kills. The unbreakable vow is a piece of magic in which two people clasp right hands. A third person binds the joining with their wand, and the one making the vow swears to do some particular thing. If they ever break that promise, they die. Snape makes exactly such a vow to Narcissa Malfoy, swearing to protect her son Draco, and to complete Draco's appointed task himself should the boy fail. What is never explained anywhere in the books, and is all the more unsettling for never being explained, is how the magic actually does the killing when a vow is broken. There is no curse cast at the moment of breaking, no poison administered, no visible mechanism of any kind. The vow itself, once broken, simply ends the life of the one who broke it, wherever they are, whatever they are doing. The magic enforces the contract directly, as though the universe itself is quietly keeping the books and collecting the debt the instant it comes due. This places the unbreakable vow among the very strangest forms of magic in the entire world, because it is magic that operates not on any physical object or living body, but on the pure abstract idea of a promise made and a promise broken. It suggests that at some deep and unspoken level, the magic of this world can act upon concepts as readily as it acts upon things, can treat a word solemnly given and a word later betrayed as real forces in the world, with real and final consequences, lethal ones, requiring no wand at all to deliver the sentence once the binding is set. A spoken intention becomes, through the vow, as solid and as deadly as any blade, and a change of heart becomes an execution. There is something almost frightening in that, the idea that in this world a promise can be made so binding that the breaking of it kills you, automatically, with no one needing to lift a hand. The 35th idea is about why small children can do wild magic and grown wizards cannot. Before they ever hold a wand or learn a single proper spell, magical children do magic constantly, by accident, without trying. Harry, frightened or angry or upset, regrows his hair overnight after a bad haircut, sets a snake loose at the zoo, finds himself suddenly on the school roof while fleeing bullies, turns a hated teacher's wig blue. This is wild, raw, uncontrolled, and often genuinely powerful magic, and nearly every young witch and wizard produces it in their early years. Then they go off to school. They are given a wand. They learn spells and incantations and wand movements, and the accidental magic quietly fades away and stops. The usual, easy explanation is simply that they learn control, that the wild magic was always there, and schooling tames it. But there is a stranger and more interesting possibility folded inside that. The wand does not only enable magic, it focuses it, channels it, narrows it to a fine and reliable point, and in the very act of channeling it, the wand may also limit it. Raw magic, wild and formless and unfocused, can do enormous and unpredictable things precisely because it is not being forced through the narrow, precise, disciplined channel of a learned spell. A wand makes a wizard accurate, reliable, repeatable, predictable, but possibly at the hidden cost of that raw, untamed, formless power they all had as children, the power to do impossible things without knowing how. And this would explain the rarest and most impressive wizards of all, the ones who can perform magic without a wand at all, silently, with a glance or a thought. They may simply be the ones who never fully lost their connection to that early, wild, unfocused source, who learned the discipline of the wand without letting it shut off the wellspring underneath. Control, in this reading, is a trade and not a pure gain. You gain precision, reliability, and safety, and you give up a little of the storm. The children are, in one strange sense, the most powerful wizards of all, and school is partly the long process of teaching them to be less so, in exchange for being able to aim. The 36th idea is about the one force the villain never understood, treated as something almost physical. Again and again, across the whole series, the thing that defeats Voldemort is not a more powerful curse or a cleverer spell. It is love. Lily Potter dies to protect her infant son, choosing to step in front of the killing curse when she was offered the chance to stand aside and live. And her sacrifice leaves a deep protection on Harry that Voldemort simply cannot break, that turns his own killing curse back upon him, that burns and blisters him when he later tries to lay a hand on the boy. Dumbledore calls this the power the Dark Lord knows not, and crucially, he speaks of it not as a soft feeling or a metaphor, but as something real, something with measurable effect, kept locked and guarded in a room of its own in the Department of Mysteries, because it is genuinely studied there as a force, alongside time and death and thought. Take that seriously, and love in this world is not only an emotion, it is a kind of magic, perhaps the oldest and least understood kind of all, capable of leaving a physical mark on a person's very skin and blood, capable of protecting them across years and even across death itself. And Voldemort, who tore his own soul into pieces and was conceived without any love to begin with, cannot perceive it, cannot wield it, cannot defend himself against it, cannot even properly believe in it. The one entire branch of magic he never bothered to learn, dismissing it as weakness and sentiment, the province of fools, turns out to be the only branch that could ever kill him. He mastered every dark art there was, every curse and every cruelty, and the thing that finally undid him was the one power he had laughed at, the power that an ordinary mother summoned without a wand, without a spell, without even a word, simply by loving her child enough to die for him. In the deepest accounting of this world, love is not the opposite of power. Love is the power, the strongest one there is, and the villain lost because he could never bring himself to study it. The 37th idea is about a charm that hides a secret inside a person. The Fidelius charm is how the Potters hid themselves from Voldemort. It works in a strange and beautiful way. It takes a secret, in their case the location of their home, and conceals that secret inside a single living soul, the chosen secret keeper. Once the charm is cast, the secret becomes literally, magically impossible to find by any other means at all. You could press your face against the window of the hidden house and not see it. You could stand in the street where it sits, and the building would simply not be there to your eyes. Only the secret keeper, and no one else in the entire world, can reveal it, and only by choosing freely to tell. This is precisely why the Potters' protection failed so utterly, and so catastrophically. They chose Peter Pettigrew as their secret keeper, believing him a loyal and devoted friend, when in fact he had already turned traitor. And because the secret lived inside Peter, and inside Peter alone, his betrayal was instant, total, and complete. He did not have to break through a defense, steal a map, crack a ward, or fight his way past anything. He simply went to Voldemort and told him where to go, spoke the secret aloud, and in that instant, the most powerful concealment magic in the wizarding world evaporated entirely, because all of that magic had been staked, from the beginning, on the loyalty of one chosen person. The Fidelius charm is perfect, flawless, unbreakable protection that depends completely and absolutely on perfect, flawless, unbreakable trust, which is to say that it is only ever as strong as the single weakest friendship you decide to build it upon, and the moment that friendship proves false, the perfect protection becomes perfectly useless. The Potters did not die because their magic was weak. They died because they trusted the wrong friend, and the deepest, most powerful protective charm they could find offered them no defense at all against that one human mistake. The 38th idea is about why time travel in this world is so oddly limited. Hermione spends her third year secretly using a time turner, a small hourglass on a fine chain that sends her back a few hours so she can attend 2 or 3 overlapping classes at once. Later, she and Harry use one to go back exactly 3 hours and quietly change the course of a single fraught night, saving 2 innocent lives. But notice that the time turners only ever go back hours, never days, never years, and that the Ministry guards them with extreme, almost fearful care in the Department of Mysteries. Why are they so strictly limited? The hints scattered through the world suggest that serious meddling with time is genuinely catastrophic, that wizards who once tried to travel back further, days or years rather than hours, were terribly and irreversibly harmed by the attempt, aged into death, driven mad, or scattered across moments, their bodies and minds simply unable to survive the strain of being dragged across so great a span of time. The Ministry restricts time turners to short hops, not merely out of caution or bureaucratic habit, but because the longer journeys destroy the traveller outright. There is, by implication, a darker version of this world, existing somewhere just off the edge of the page, full of grieving wizards who tried to go back far enough to undo some great loss, to save someone, to reach a moment a year or a decade gone, and who were unmade, body and soul, by the reaching. The Time Turner is a tool that can rescue you neatly from a single bad afternoon, recover a missed lesson, undo a few wrong hours, and it will kill you, horribly, the moment you ask it to rescue you from a bad year, or a lost love, or a death you cannot bear. The thing that can mend a small mistake cannot touch a real grief, and those who tried to make it do so are the unspoken cautionary ghosts behind every careful rule the Ministry wrote around it. The 39th idea is about the limits of wearing another person's face. Polyjuice Potion lets a witch or wizard take on the exact physical form of another person, given only a small piece of that person, a single hair, a clipping of nail. It is how Barty Crouch became Moody for a whole year, how Harry and Ron became Crabbe and Goyle to infiltrate the Slytherin common room, how Hermione once accidentally became part cat after using a stray hair. But the potion has firm, hard limits, and those limits quietly shape every single plot it ever touches. It copies the body, the face, the voice, the height, the build, every outward physical detail of the person perfectly. But it does not copy the person's magical ability, their memories, their knowledge, their skill, or their talents. Drink the potion and become, outwardly, a brilliant and famous duelist, and you will look exactly like them, sound exactly like them, but you will be no better at dueling than you were a moment before, with only your own abilities to draw on. It also cannot be used to become a magical creature rather than a human. Any attempt to do so goes badly and dangerously wrong, as Hermione's accidental cat transformation shows. So Polyjuice is always a disguise, never a transfer of power or knowledge. The imposter wearing the stolen face must still act the part using only their own mind, their own skills, their own information, constantly hoping that no one asks them to do or say or remember something that the real person could manage, and they cannot. Every single Polyjuice deception across the whole series is therefore a kind of tightrope walk, a person wearing someone else's body but carrying only their own self inside it. Always one unexpected question, one casual request, one shared memory away from total exposure. The face is borrowed and perfect. Everything behind the face is still entirely your own, and that gap between the convincing surface and the unchanged interior is where every Polyjuice plot lives, holds its breath, and risks everything. The 40th idea closes this stretch with a quiet suggestion that magical adulthood is real, not just legal. At 17, a young wizard comes of age, recognized by wizarding law as an adult, free at last to perform magic outside of school whenever they wish. And at that same precise point, the trace that detects their underage magic breaks and falls away, ceasing to monitor them. The law treats 17 as the threshold of adulthood, the age at which the watching stops. But the breaking of the trace at exactly that moment hints at something deeper than a merely chosen legal age, something more than a number that lawmakers settled on for convenience. It suggests that 17 marks a genuine, real change in the young wizard themselves, a point at which their magic finally settles, matures, and becomes wholly and stably their own, in some biological or magical sense that the books never quite spell out, but keep gesturing toward. Before 17, a young wizard's magic is still forming, still growing, still somewhat unstable and unsettled, and perhaps it is precisely that unsettled, developing quality that the trace is able to detect and track in the first place. After 17, the magic has set, has finished its long, slow growth, has become a settled and permanent part of the person, and so the detection simply no longer works, because there is no longer a changing, developing thing there to detect. Coming of age in this world, then, may not be a date that some committee of wizards simply picked out and agreed upon. It may be the recognition, written into law, of a real transformation that was always going to happen on its own regardless, the magic inside a person finishing its growth, the way a body finishes growing into its adult form, reaching its final settled shape. The law did not decide that 17 is when a wizard becomes an adult. The law noticed that something real happens to a wizard's magic around 17 and built itself around that fact. The trace does not stop watching because the rules say so. It stops watching because at last there is nothing left to watch grow. We've come a long way into the quiet now. 40 ideas, and the world has gotten very soft around the edges. This is a good place to pause for just a moment, because we're roughly at the halfway mark. We're about halfway now. If you've drifted in and out, that's exactly right. If it's helping, leave a comment with the number you fell asleep on, only if you're awake. Then let it go. We were about to step into the parts of the world that aren't quite human. The 41st idea is about the creatures pulling the carriages and who can see them. Every year the students travel from the Hogwarts station up to the castle in carriages that appear, to most of them, to roll along by themselves, pulling forward with no horse and nothing visible in front of them. For years Harry sees them exactly this way, as carriages that simply move on their own, and thinks nothing more of it. Then, after he has watched someone die and truly understood it, he arrives at the station and suddenly sees the creatures that have been drawing those carriages all along. Thastrals, leathery, skeletal, black, winged horses with blank white eyes, gentle but unsettling to look at, and visible only to those who have seen death and come to accept it. The carriages were never self-moving. They have always been pulled by these creatures, every single year, on every single journey, for every student who ever rode up to the castle. The first years who cannot see them simply have not yet lost anyone. So the school is full of these dark, patient, gentle animals, doing the quiet daily work of moving children about, present the entire time, invisible to the innocent and plain to the bereaved. The whole fleet of Thastrals is in effect a silent measure of grief running through the student body, year after year. The students who can suddenly see them are the ones who have already learnt the hardest lesson a person can learn, and they ride up to school each new term seated beside a truth that their younger, luckier schoolmates cannot yet perceive at all, a truth that becomes visible only on the far side of loss. The carriages everyone takes for granted have always been drawn by death itself, made gentle, and only the grieving can see what has been carrying them all along. The 42nd idea is about a kind of magic stronger than the wizards, wielded by the people the wizards enslave. House elves serve wizarding families, bound to obey their masters, punishing themselves savagely when they fail or speak ill of them, treated as property to be inherited and handed on. And yet, watch closely what house elf magic can actually do. Dobby apparats in and out of Hogwarts, straight through the powerful enchantments that prevent any witch or wizard from doing the same. House elves move unseen, work magic without wands, vanish dishes and prepare feasts, and accomplish in moments things that would tax a trained wizard. By a number of measures, elf magic is more powerful, more flexible, and less limited than the magic of the very masters who own them. This is the quiet horror sitting underneath all the comedy and pathos of the house elves, a whole people gifted with extraordinary magic, capable of feats their owners cannot match, have been bound into total servitude, taught across uncounted generations to believe that they want nothing else, that freedom would be a shame and an insult, that a gift of clothes is the worst thing that could befall them. They have been conditioned so thoroughly, for so long, that most of them recoil in genuine horror from the very idea of being free. Their power is not absent and not weak. It is harnessed, redirected, and turned entirely to the service of the people who keep them down. The whole gleaming wizarding world rests, in no small part, on the unpaid labor of magical beings who could very likely have ruled it, kept docile not by any superior force, since the elves are arguably the stronger, but by a slavery so ancient and so complete that it has rewritten what the enslaved believe about themselves, down to the bone. The servants could overthrow the masters. They have simply been taught over 1,000 years that they would never want to. The 43rd idea follows straight from that, looking closely at one impossible thing Dobby does. Hogwarts is protected by powerful, ancient enchantments that prevent any witch or wizard from apparating anywhere within its grounds. This is stated flatly as an iron and unbreakable rule of the place. You cannot apparate inside Hogwarts, no matter how skilled you are, and yet Dobby does it, repeatedly, appearing and vanishing with a loud crack inside the very castle where no wizard alive could manage it. When Harry, astonished, points out that surely you cannot apparate within the school grounds, Dobby cheerfully and matter-of-factly explains that elf magic is simply not the same as wizard magic, that house elves have their own entirely separate way of coming and going, untouched by the wards built to stop wizards. This is a small line, easy to pass over, but its implications run deep into the foundations of the school. The protections of Hogwarts, laid down by the four founders 1,000 years ago, and reinforced ever since, were designed specifically and only against wizard magic. They were never built to account for the different, older, and in some ways stronger magic that the house elves carry, because the elves were beneath the founders' notice entirely, mere servants, furniture that cooked and cleaned, not beings worth defending a castle against. So there has always been a gap in the great defences of Hogwarts, a whole category of magical being who can pass freely through walls of enchantment that would stop the most powerful wizard who ever lived, and who can do so simply because nobody who ever built or strengthened those walls thought the elves important enough to bother keeping out. The servants could always go exactly where the masters could not. The most secure castle in the wizarding world has stood for 1,000 years, with its doors quietly open to the one people everyone in it was too proud to notice. And not once, in all that time, did the wizards think to wonder what their enslaved elves could do if they ever chose to. The 44th idea is about the centaurs and a knowledge they refuse to use. Centaurs live deep in the Forbidden Forest, proud, aloof, and wary of humans, and they read the future in the slow movements of the stars and planets. They speak of Mars burning unusually bright, of signs and portents written across the night sky, of great events long foreseen in the heavens. They genuinely seem to perceive, in some real way, the shape of what is coming. And yet, and this is the heart of them, they refuse, almost always, to act on what they see. When Harry is in mortal danger, when terrible events are unfolding around them, the centaurs hold firmly to a strict and ancient philosophy of non-interference. They believe deeply that it is not their place to intervene in the short-term, scrambling affairs of individuals, to try to change what the heavens have already shown will be, to meddle in the small immediate fates of humans and creatures when the stars speak of vaster, slower turnings. This makes them maddening to the humans who want their help, and it gives them at the same time a strange and tragic dignity. They can see dimly the shape of the future, and they choose to let it happen, because to a centaur the true arrogance, the real sin, lies precisely in interference in a single creature, presuming itself wise enough to reach in and redirect the vast, slow machinery of fate that the planets describe. A centaur who reads in the stars that a particular person will suffer will, as a firm matter of principle, stand back and let that suffering come, not from cruelty, but from a conviction that to do otherwise would be a worse crime, the crime of believing oneself greater than the order of the heavens. Their gift of foresight comes bound inseparably to a vow of restraint, and they would far rather watch a tragedy unfold exactly as the stars foretold it, than commit what they see as the deepest arrogance of all, the arrogance of thinking they know better than fate, and acting to prevent it. The 45th idea is about a monster engineered to wait. The basilisk that lived in the Chamber of Secrets was bred by Salazar Slytherin himself, a colossal serpent whose direct gaze kills instantly and whose venom is among the deadliest substances in the entire world, able to destroy even a Horcrux. Slytherin hid the creature in a secret chamber beneath the school, sealed by magic so that only his own true heir, a Parselmouth of his bloodline, could open it and release the monster to purge Hogwarts of the students Slytherin deemed unworthy of magic. Now consider the sheer timescale of that plan, because it is staggering. Slytherin lived and died 1,000 years ago, and the basilisk was still alive, still lethal, still waiting, when the teenage Tom Riddle opened the chamber and loosed it, and still alive again 50 years after that, when the chamber opened a second time. Slytherin engineered a weapon designed to outlast him by a full 1,000 years, a creature patient and long-lived enough to wait, coiled in the dark beneath the school, through century after century, generation after generation, for an heir who shared both his blood and his hatred to finally arrive and wake it. He did not build a trap for his own lifetime, or even for his children's. He built one for the distant, unimaginable future, trusting that somewhere far down the long branching line of his descendants, someone would eventually be born with exactly the right blood and exactly the right cruelty to come and finish the work he had started and would never live to see. The basilisk is in a sense the most patient act of malice it is possible to imagine, a 1,000-year-old grudge given scales and venom, sleeping in the foundations of a school full of children, waiting with perfect inhuman patience for the right monster to be born at last and come down to use it. Slytherin's hatred did not die with him. He found a way to make it wait. The 46th idea is about a bird who serves no master, only chooses a friend. Fawkes is Dumbledore's phoenix, a magnificent scarlet and gold bird, who when his body grows old, bursts into flame and is reborn as a chick from his own ashes, whose tears can heal any wound, who can carry impossible weights, and who comes when true loyalty and courage call him. It is easy and natural to think of Fawkes as Dumbledore's pet, a possession, a fine magical animal that belongs to the headmaster the way an owl belongs to a student. But phoenixes are not owned, not really. A phoenix chooses to stay with a particular wizard, and stays only as long as it wishes to, free to leave at any moment it likes, bound by nothing but its own will. Fawkes remained with Dumbledore for many long years, not because he was caught or kept or bound, but because he chose to, because of who Dumbledore was, because something in the man was worth a phoenix's freely given company. And when Dumbledore dies, Fawkes does something that settles the matter completely. He sings a single, unbearable lament over the body. A song of such grief that everyone who hears it feels their own sorrow given voice, and then he flies away from Hogwarts, and he is never seen there again. He does not pass to the next headmaster like a piece of office furniture or an heirloom in the school's inventory. He does not stay on out of duty to the castle. He grieves, fully and openly, and then he goes, because the one reason he had ever stayed is gone. The bond between them was always personal, a free creature's freely given loyalty to one particular man and to no one else, and when that man is gone from the world, so too is the only reason Fawkes had to remain in it. The most loyal companion in the whole long story was loyal precisely and only because nothing on earth ever forced him to be, and that is what made his loyalty mean something, and what made his leaving when it came so final. The 47th idea is about the guards of the wizard prison and whether they are even alive. Dementors are among the most frightening things in this entire world. They feed on happiness, gliding close and drawing every good feeling, every hope, every warm memory out of a person, until only cold despair and their worst recollections remain. With their ultimate attack, the Dementor's kiss, they clamp their hooded faces to a victim and suck out the soul itself, leaving the body alive and breathing but utterly empty, a fate widely considered worse than death. They cannot be killed by any spell known to wizardkind. They can only be driven back, and only temporarily, by the Patronus charm, a burst of concentrated, summoned happiness given animal shape, and they breed and multiply wherever there is enough misery and decay to sustain them. Sit for a moment with that one fact, that they cannot be killed. Almost everything else in this world can be destroyed by some means, however difficult, the basilisk, the Horcruxes, Voldemort himself in the end, but not these. There is no curse, no weapon, no power that ends a Dementor. And that suggests something genuinely strange and chilling, that Dementors may not be truly alive in any ordinary sense at all. They may be closer to a force than a creature, despair itself given a body and a hunger, something that does not die because it was never properly living to begin with. They multiply in places thick with misery, the way mold blooms in the damp and the dark, and you can no more kill them than you can kill cold, or grief, or the night. You can only push them back with light, with the deliberate summoning of joy, and only for as long as you can hold that light up against them. The most terrifying thing about the Dementors, in the end, is not what they do to a person, dreadful as that is. It is that they cannot be ended at all, only resisted, again and again forever, because the thing they are made of is the one thing in the world that never fully goes away. The 48th idea is about how an entire deadly species in the forest traces back to one boy's mistake. Deep in the Forbidden Forest lives a colony of acromantulas, enormous, talking venomous spiders, led for many years by the ancient Aragog. There are dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, a whole thriving, dangerous, self-sustaining population hidden among the trees. And every single one of them descends from one creature, from one egg, from one boy's mistake. When Hagrid was a student at Hogwarts, decades ago, he kept an acromantula egg illegally, hidden in a cupboard, because he loved monstrous creatures and could not bear to think of one destroyed. That egg hatched into Aragog, when Hagrid was wrongly blamed for the horrors of the Chamber of Secrets, partly because the strange spider was discovered. He was expelled, and he released Aragog into the forest to save the creature's life. And there Aragog lived on, found a mate named Mozag, and bred. The entire colony, every lethal, scuttling spider lurking in the dark of those woods to this day, grew out of that one egg that a lonely half-giant boy could not bring himself to throw away. Hagrid's great defining flaw, his boundless love for monstrous creatures, his genuine inability to look at anything, however dangerous, and see a monster rather than a friend, seeded a permanent and growing danger in the woods right beside the school full of children. It is a perfect small portrait of exactly who Hagrid is. He looked at a giant venomous spider and saw a friend worth protecting and hiding and ultimately saving, and because he did, generations of that spider's children now hunt and breed and multiply in the dark a short walk from the castle. The kindness and the danger are not two separate things about him. They are the same single act, impossible to pull apart. The warmth that makes him beloved and the recklessness that keeps endangering everyone, both flowing from the same soft heart that simply cannot turn a creature away. The 49th idea is about money, ownership, and the root of every war the goblins ever fought. The goblins run the Wizarding Bank, forge the finest metalwork in their world, and have fought several bloody rebellions against the wizards across the centuries. At the very bottom of all that long conflict lies a single, simple, irreconcilable disagreement about what ownership actually means. To a wizard, the matter is obvious. If you buy an object, you own it, fully and forever, and you may pass it down to your children, who will then own it in their turn, and on down the generations. To a goblin, this is theft. A goblin believes that the maker of an object is its true and eternal owner. A goblin who forges a sword, a crown, a goblet, considers that the wizard who paid for it has merely rented it for the span of his own lifetime, and that upon that wizard's death, the object should rightfully return to the goblins who made it, to be sold again or kept. Wizards, of course, do no such thing. They keep goblin-made treasures as cherished family heirlooms, handing them proudly down through the generations for centuries, which to the goblins is simple, ongoing, multi-generational theft, the willful withholding of property that was only ever loaned out in the first place. This single difference in philosophy, never once reconciled across all their shared history, lies underneath centuries of mutual mistrust, resentment, and outright war. And the maddening thing about it is that neither side is lying or cheating by its own lights. The wizard genuinely believes he owns what he bought. The goblin genuinely believes the wizard is a thief. They simply hold two completely incompatible ideas about who a beautiful made thing truly belongs to, and because neither people will yield even slightly on a principle that feels to each of them like plain obvious justice, the wound never closes and never can. The goblin rebellions are not really about gold or power at all. They are about a definition of ownership that wizards and goblins have never once managed to agree on, a quiet philosophical chasm dressed up over the centuries in blood. The 50th idea closes this stretch by looking at a man the law treated as a monster. Remus Lupin is one of the kindest, gentlest, most thoughtful people in the entire story. A brilliant and patient teacher, a loyal friend, a man of deep and quiet decency who carries himself with shabby dignity through a hard life. He is also a werewolf, bitten as a small child by a vengeful adult, and once a month, at the full moon, he transforms against his will into a dangerous, mindless beast. For 12 nights a year that he never asked for and cannot prevent, the wizarding world classifies him not as a citizen with an illness, but as a creature, a part being, a thing to be registered, feared, restricted, and shunned. Anti-werewolf legislation makes it nearly impossible for him to hold a steady job, which is exactly why he is so often poor, threadbare, and going hungry. Employers will not keep him once they know, and when his condition becomes known at Hogwarts, parents withdraw their children from his classes in a wave of fear and disgust, despite his being, by common agreement, the best teacher of defense against the dark arts the school had seen in years, the one who actually taught the students to defend themselves. The law does not see the man at all. It sees only the wolf, 12 hours a month, and on the strength of those few hours, it strips away his rights and his livelihood for all the rest of his days. Lupin spends his entire life paying, over and over and over, for something that was done to him when he was a defenseless child, in a society that has somehow decided that his suffering makes him suspect rather than worthy of care, that treats his affliction as if it were a crime he chose. He is the clearest and saddest mirror the books ever hold up to our own oldest habit, the habit of looking at the sick, the different and the marked, and deciding that what was done to them is somehow their own fault, and that the right response to their misfortune is not compassion but fear. 50 ideas. We're past the middle now, and there's nothing ahead but the long gentle slope down toward the end. The next stretch is about the castle itself, Hogwarts, the place, and the secrets built into its very stones. The 51st idea is that the castle may be quietly alive. Hogwarts behaves, at many points throughout the story, less like a building and more like a living thing with moods and intentions of its own. The grand staircases move, shifting and swinging and rotating to connect different floors, sometimes seeming to deliberately carry students somewhere they had not meant to go. Doors appear and vanish, whole rooms relocate. The castle reveals hidden passages to those who genuinely need them and conceals them from those who would misuse them. The room of requirement responds to a person's need with what feels unmistakably like intention and care. Across the entire series, there runs a steady, quiet sense that Hogwarts is not a passive structure that magic merely happens inside of, but a place that participates, that possesses something like awareness, that chooses. When the school is threatened in the final battle, it seems to rally, its defenses and its very architecture turning and reshaping themselves to protect the people sheltering within its walls. A castle that has stood for 1,000 years, soaked through and through with the concentrated magic of countless witches and wizards living and learning and dying inside it, may well have absorbed enough of that magic over the centuries to develop a dim, slow, ancient form of life of its own. Not a mind exactly, nothing so quick or so human as that, but a presence, a vast old guardian that expresses itself through moving staircases and shifting walls, and the strange, uncanny way it always seems to know who truly belongs within it, and who does not. The students believe, naturally enough, that they are simply living and studying inside a very large and very magical building. The deeper truth the story keeps gently hinting at is that they may in fact be living inside something that is faintly and slowly and patiently alive and watching over them, and that has been doing so for 1,000 years before they arrived and will go on doing so long after they have gone. Hogwarts is not their shelter. Hogwarts is, in some quiet way, their keeper. The 52nd idea is about a 1,000-year-old secret and the ordinary worker who nearly tripped over it. The Chamber of Secrets sits deep beneath the school, its entrance hidden in a girl's bathroom, behind a sink marked with a tiny carved serpent, openable only by someone who can speak to it in parcel tongue, the language of snakes. Salazar Slytherin built it to be found by no one but his own true heir, but the school around it kept being built, expanded, renovated, repaired and maintained across 10 long centuries by generation after generation of ordinary witches and wizards who knew nothing of what lay beneath. And at some point, someone installed the plumbing. There is a quiet, almost comic implication buried in that fact. A Hogwarts bathroom was constructed, with pipes and taps and sinks, directly on top of the entrance to the most dangerous secret in the entire history of the castle. Some plumber, some workman, some long-forgotten maintenance wizard fitted those pipes and that sink inches above a 1,000-year-old chamber holding a monster that could kill with a glance, and never knew it, never suspected, and went home each evening thinking he had done a perfectly ordinary job. The sink that opens the chamber is a real, working sink, presumably installed by someone who believed they were simply plumbing a bathroom, which means the chamber stayed hidden across all those centuries not only by the strength of Slytherin's magic, but by sheer staggering luck, by the simple fact that in all the long years of building and repairing and renovating that exact spot, not one single person who ever worked on it happened to be a parcel-mouth who idly spoke to the tap. The deadliest secret in the school survived 1,000 years of renovation because none of the builders ever talked to a sink. The 53rd idea is about 4 portraits we are never shown. The headmaster's office is hung all around with the portraits of every previous headmaster and headmistress of Hogwarts, who doze in their frames and wake to offer counsel, and who continue, in their painted way, to serve the school long after their deaths. Yet across the whole of the story, we are never once shown portraits of the 4 founders themselves hanging together. Given how the founders' great partnership actually ended, that absence may be quietly telling. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin began as the closest of friends and allies, 4 brilliant witches and wizards who built the greatest school of magic in the world together, with their own hands and their shared vision, and they ended in bitter, irreparable division, with Slytherin storming out forever after a furious quarrel with the others over which children deserved to be taught magic at all. A quarrel that broke the fellowship and was never healed. Now a portrait holds and preserves the manner, the opinions, and the temperament of its subject, as they were in life. So imagine the 4 founders' portraits hung together in a single room, each one still carrying the full, undimmed force of that final terrible argument. Slytherin's cold contempt, Gryffindor's hot anger, the deep wound that split the 4 of them apart at the end. Perhaps they were never painted together, or never displayed together, precisely because the founders, even as portraits, could not be in the same frame or the same room without instantly resuming the very fight that had broken them in life. The school they built together stands united and whole in its stone. 4 houses gathered under one ancient roof, generation after generation. But its 4 founders may well be the one thing in the entire castle too bitterly, permanently divided ever to be shown side by side, 4 faces that cannot share a wall, the living proof that the unity of the school was something its makers achieved and then lost, and never managed to recover, not even in paint. The 54th idea is a small, neat piece of magical engineering hiding in plain sight. Hogwarts feeds hundreds of students and staff at every single meal, the food simply appearing on the long house tables in the Great Hall as if conjured from nowhere, platters and goblets and dishes materializing at the start of each feast. But it does not come from nowhere, because magic cannot create food from nothing by the deep rule we have already met. It comes from the kitchens, where the house elves cook everything by hand, with real ingredients in genuinely enormous quantities, sweating over real fires and real pots. And the kitchens are located in a very particular and very clever place. They sit directly beneath the Great Hall, on the floor immediately below, and the 4 long elf tables down there are positioned to mirror exactly the 4 house tables in the hall above. When a meal is ready, the elves load the cooked food onto their kitchen tables, and it is sent magically straight up through the ceiling to appear, hot and complete, on the matching tables in the hall above. The whole arrangement is a piece of clean, practical, almost humble design. The dining hall sits directly on top of the kitchen specifically, so that the food has the shortest possible distance to travel, simply straight up, table to table, with no carrying and no delay. It is exactly the kind of sensible, unglamorous, thought-through detail that makes the magical world feel genuinely lived in rather than merely imagined. A 1,000-year-old castle with the plain good sense to put its kitchens right below its dining room, and a small tireless army of cooks working out of sight beneath the feet of every student who eats 3 meals a day there for 7 years and never once stops to wonder where any of it actually comes from, or who made it, or how it found its way onto the plate. The 55th idea is about the guardians of the castle's doors and who really chose them. To enter the Gryffindor common room, A student gives a password to a portrait of a large woman in a pink dress, the Fat Lady, who guards the entrance and swings aside to let the worthy in. The other houses have their own guardians and their own means of entry. A bare stretch of wall, a riddle to be answered, a stone serpent. These guardians are usually treated, when they are thought about at all, as a simple security measure set up by the school staff, like a lock on a door. But there are scattered hints that the castle itself has a hand in who guards its thresholds, that the protective magic of Hogwarts is far older and far deeper than anything the current generation of teachers ever arranged. The Fat Lady has guarded that particular door for a very long time, longer than any living staff member has served at the school, longer than anyone can quite remember. The Guardians have their own distinct personalities, their own long histories, their own friendships and rivalries with one another, the portraits visiting back and forth, all of which suggests a system that grew organically over many centuries, rather than one assigned by some headmaster filling a post on a duty roster. And if the castle is, as so much else suggests, alive in some slow and dim way, protective of the children within its walls, then its guardians may be less like hired security and more like the castle's own chosen sentinels, presences and portraits that the building itself has placed at its vulnerable points over the long centuries, an instinctive defense woven into the fabric of the place. The students think a teacher simply decided that a painting should ask them for a password. It may be far stranger and far older than that. The castle may be guarding its own children in its own ancient way, through faces it chose long before any of the present teachers were born, and the password is less a lock the staff installed than a courtesy the castle extends to those it has decided belong inside. The 56th idea is about the one chaotic spirit no headmaster can command. Peeves is the poltergeist of Hogwarts, a malicious, cackling spirit of pure mischief, who throws chalk, jams locks, drops walking sticks and water balloons on people's heads, blows raspberries, and generally torments every living soul he can reach, student and teacher alike. He is not a ghost, not the lingering spirit of any dead person, but something else entirely, an indestructible embodiment of chaos and disorder that has apparently always been a part of the castle, as old as the trouble itself. And here is what is genuinely striking about him, once you stop to notice it. Peeves answers to no one. The headmasters of Hogwarts cannot truly control him, cannot order him about, cannot remove him. They can only negotiate with him, bargain or threaten, and even then only sometimes, and only barely. He predates the tenure of every living member of staff, perhaps by a very long way indeed, and he will outlast them all. There is only one single figure in the entire story ever shown to hold any real authority over Peeves, to make him stop and cower and obey, and it is not a headmaster, not the most powerful wizard on the staff, but the bloody Baron, the grim, blood-spattered, chain-rattling ghost of Slytherin House, of whom even chaos itself is afraid. So the castle contains within it a force of pure, ungovernable disorder, that the official authorities, for all their power and position, simply cannot master, and that is kept even partly in check only by the dread presence of a murderer's tormented ghost. Peeves is the part of Hogwarts that flatly refuses to be governed, as old and as persistent as the very idea of mischief, bowing to nothing and no one in all the castle except the one spirit there, carrying a weight of guilt and penance heavy enough to frighten even chaos, even pure disorder, into briefly, grudgingly behaving itself. The school can teach its students, discipline them, sort them, and protect them. The one thing it cannot do, in 1,000 years of trying, is control Peeves. The 57th idea is about why the forest is forbidden and what its prohibition protects. The Forbidden Forest is, as its very name announces, forbidden to students, off-limits, dangerous, patrolled by the gamekeeper, and guarded against. The official reason given is the dangerous creatures that live within it, the acromantulas, the werewolves, the things that hunt in the dark beneath the trees. And that reason is real enough. But the forest also hides knowledge, not only danger, and that may be just as much the point of keeping the children out of it. The centaurs live in that forest, with their reading of the future in the stars, and their proud, ancient refusal to share what they see with humans. Aragog's vast colony of spiders lives there, the living descendants of a secret that once got a boy expelled, and that the school would surely rather no one examined too closely. Other creatures, other beings, other old truths and grievances shelter under those dark branches, beyond the school's control and beyond its supervision. To forbid the forest, then, is to keep the students away, not only from being eaten or harmed, but from all the things they might learn if they ever spent real time among the beings who live there, beyond the reach of the school. The centaurs do not want curious human children prying into their affairs and their prophecies. The forest holds histories and secrets that the wider wizarding world might well prefer stay buried among the roots. So the prohibition quietly does double duty. It protects the children from the forest, yes, and at the very same time it protects the forest's many secrets from the children, keeping a whole shadow world of knowledge and old unresolved grievance safely out of bounds, fenced off behind a single forbidding word, where inquisitive young students cannot wander in and stumble across truths that the adults of the wizarding world would very much rather leave undisturbed, sleeping in the dark among the trees. The word forbidden keeps the children out. It also, just as surely, keeps what is inside from getting out. The 58th idea is about an entire civilization living in the lake, barely mentioned. Beneath the dark surface of the great Hogwarts lake lives a whole community of merpeople, glimpsed only briefly during the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, when the champions dive down to retrieve what was taken from them. And they are not a few scattered, solitary creatures drifting in the deep. They have a proper village down there, with dwellings and streets, a culture, a chief who leads them, even art adorning the walls of their homes. A whole ordered society living in the cold green water just below the spot where, far above, the students sleep and study and never think to look. They have their own language, the eerie screeching sound that resolves into comprehensible speech only when the listener is underwater. And there appears to be some long-standing arrangement, some treaty or quiet understanding between the merpeople and the school, governing how the two very different communities manage to coexist, sharing the same body of water year after year. Yet across the entire span of the story, this whole underwater civilization is mentioned only in passing, surfacing into the human narrative for a single afternoon and then sinking back out of sight and out of mind. An entire people with their own government, their own customs, their own art and language and history, live just a few hundred feet from where hundreds of wizarding children sleep, and the human world above barely acknowledges that they exist at all. It is one more quiet reminder of just how crowded this world really is, with beings the wizards scarcely think about, how much life and society and politics goes on at the edges and beneath the surface of the story we follow. Right there, under the calm, flat water, the students see from their windows every single day. An entire society goes about its whole existence, with its own quarrels and alliances and long memory, breaking the surface of the human tale for one brief task, before vanishing back down into the depths where it has always lived, and where it will go on living, unregarded, long after the champions have climbed out and dried off and forgotten it was ever there. The 59th idea is about a strange tapestry that marks the way to the most secret room in the school. On the 7th floor hangs a tapestry depicting Barnabas the Barmy, a wizard attempting the absurd task of teaching trolls to dance ballet, the trolls clubbing him as he tries. It is a peculiar comic image, easy to walk past, but that tapestry is a landmark. Directly across from it is the stretch of blank wall where the room of requirement appears, for those who know how to summon it, by walking past 3 times while thinking of what they need. So the ridiculous picture of a man trying to make trolls dance is, for those in the know, a signpost, the marker that tells you exactly where to stand to call up the most secret and useful room in the castle. The absurdity may even be a kind of camouflage. Who would suspect that the way to a room of infinite usefulness is marked by a silly tapestry of clubbed ballet trolls? Generations of students have hurried past Barnabas the Barmy without a second look, never knowing that the foolish old wizard and his uncooperative trolls stand guard in their way over the doorway to a room that becomes whatever its visitor most needs. The 60th idea closes this stretch by explaining why the magical world and the electric world cannot mix. There is no electricity at Hogwarts, no computers, no telephones, no electric light anywhere in the ancient castle. The explanation the story gives is simple and consequential. Magic and the Muggle technology of electronics actively interfere with one another. The sheer concentration of magic in a place like Hogwarts causes electrical and electronic devices to malfunction, to go haywire, to scramble and fail, and simply refuse to work at all. This is why the wizarding world, even in thoroughly modern times, still runs on candles and quills and owls and crackling fireplaces, not because wizards are quaint or old-fashioned or stubbornly resistant to progress, but because their own magic actively breaks the machines that the rest of the world has come to depend on entirely. A wizard cannot simply carry a mobile phone into a magical space and expect it to function. The very air of a place thick with magic scrambles the delicate inner workings of electronics into uselessness. It is a clean and elegant piece of world building because it keeps the two civilizations genuinely physically separate, not merely by law and secrecy and hidden doorways, but by a basic and unbridgeable incompatibility woven into the nature of things. When magic is strong, the machines fall silent and dead, and so the wizards are left not by choice or nostalgia, but by simple necessity, with the older ways that magic does not break, the flame and the feather and the owl on the wing. The two worlds are kept apart at the deepest level, not only because the wizards choose to hide, but because the moment the two ways of doing things are brought together, one of them stops working entirely. Magic and the machine cannot share a room, and so they have never truly shared a world. And the candlelit corridors of Hogwarts are not a stylistic choice, but a physical inevitability, the only kind of light that will hold steady in a place so saturated with magic that no bulb could ever stay lit. 60 ideas behind us now. The castle is quiet, the lake is still, and we're going to step outside the school for a while, into the wider world, the ministry and the institutions that run this society from the shadows. Stay soft, stay slow. None of this needs holding on to. The 61st idea is about a department devoted to the things no one understands. Inside the Ministry of Magic, far below ground, lies the Department of Mysteries, where the wizards called Unspeakables study the deepest and least understood questions of magic. Walk through it and you find rooms devoted to specific forces. A room full of clocks and time turners, where time itself is studied. A locked room that is never opened, holding the force Dumbledore says is the most mysterious and most powerful of all, the force of love, kept behind a door no one can breach. The Death Chamber, with its veiled archway, a room of thought and the mind, full of floating brains. A room of planets and space, a model of the heavens turning in the dark. Look at what these rooms have in common. Time, death, love, and thought. These are the four great forces that the wizards, for all their power, cannot master or fully comprehend, and so they have built rooms to study them in, generation after generation. They can transfigure objects, brew impossible potions, fly, vanish from one place and reappear in another, raise castles and tame dragons. But time and death and love and the workings of the mind remain beyond them, studied endlessly in secret rooms and never solved, never conquered, never reduced to a spell. The Department of Mysteries is, in a way, the wizarding world's honest confession of its own limits, a place built specifically to gather together the exact four things that magic cannot defeat, and to keep them under patient study in the hope of someday understanding what even the greatest wizards have to admit, in the end, that they do not. The most powerful institution in their world keeps a basement devoted entirely to its own ignorance. The 62nd idea is about a travel network that is also a surveillance network. The Flu network connects fireplaces all across the wizarding world. Throw a pinch of glittering powder into the flames, step into the green fire, speak your destination clearly, and you are carried, spinning, from one hearth to another, anywhere in the country. It is the ordinary, everyday way wizards get about, as common and unremarkable to them as a bus route is to us. But the Flu network is regulated, monitored and controlled by the Ministry of Magic, which oversees which fireplaces are connected to the network and which are not. The Ministry can watch which hearths connect to which, can open and restrict access, can in principle observe the comings and goings of travelers across the entire interconnected system. In ordinary, peaceful times, this is mere administration, the dull, necessary management of a national network, and no one thinks twice about it. But consider what that same everyday convenience quietly becomes in dark times. A government that controls and monitors the flu network knows, in principle, a very great deal about who is visiting whom, which households are connected to which others, who is travelling where and when. When the Ministry falls under Voldemort's control in the final book, this dull piece of infrastructure transforms instantly into something sinister, the network of fireplaces becoming a web through which the new regime can watch the movements and connections of the entire population, mapping out the secret links between everyone who might resist. The very same system that lets a grandmother pop through the fire to visit her grandchildren for tea can, in the wrong hands, lay bare the hidden connections of every member of the resistance. The wizards live their whole lives travelling, cheerfully and unthinkingly, through a national network that has always quietly been capable of watching every route they take, and they only discover what that means on the day the wrong people take charge of it, when the cosy green fire in the family hearth becomes, overnight, an open eye. The 63rd idea is about why the wizard prison is guarded by soul-eating horrors. Azkaban, the wizard prison, sits on a remote island in the cold North Sea, far from any shore, and for most of its long history it was guarded by Dementors. The prisoners live among creatures that feed on every happy thought, that force them to relive their very worst memories over and over without end, that leave them hollow and despairing, and that will, if ordered, perform the Dementor's kiss and suck out their souls entirely, leaving the body alive and empty. Why would any society choose to guard its prison this way, with creatures that torture the inmates every waking hour? The answer is bleak and very human. By using Dementors, the Ministry outsourced its cruelty. No human jailer had to walk the cells inflicting despair. No person had to stand over the prisoners and torment them, had to look them in the eye and break them. The Dementors did all of it, automatically, as their very nature, while the wizards in charge kept their own hands clean and their consciences quiet and undisturbed. They could tell themselves they were merely housing dangerous criminals on a far-off island out of sight, while the truth was that they had handed those criminals over to creatures that tortured them relentlessly, every hour of every day and night, for years, for life. It is the perfect bureaucratic evil, a cruelty so complete and so total that no single individual ever has to feel responsible for any part of it, because the suffering is delivered by something that is not a person, that follows no order beyond its own endless hunger, that cannot be reasoned with or blamed. The Ministry found a way to be utterly monstrous without any one wizard ever having to be the monster, and the Dementors at Azkaban are what that looks like, a punishment so cruel that the people who imposed it arranged never to have to watch it being carried out. The 64th idea is about the law that created a hidden world and what that world forgot. Centuries ago, wizards and muggles lived far more openly alongside one another, until waves of persecution and witch hunts drove the wizards into hiding, and the International Statute of Secrecy was signed, requiring the entire magical world to conceal itself completely from the non-magical one. From that point onward, the two worlds split apart, and the wizards built a whole civilization behind a veil of secrecy, with hidden streets, hidden pubs, hidden shops, a hidden government, an entire functioning society that ordinary people pass by every day and never once see. The statute kept the wizards safe from persecution, and in that narrow sense it worked. But it cost them something they may not even realize they lost. A society that hides itself away completely from another, for century after century, gradually loses the very habit of coexistence, forgets how to live beside the people it is hiding from. The wizarding world, sealed off behind its charms and its secrecy, slowly stopped learning how to live alongside muggles, stopped trying to understand them, and in that long isolation, contempt and ignorance grew unchecked in the dark. The pure-blood obsession, the casual sneering disdain for muggles, the genuine inability of many grown wizards to so much as dress in muggle clothing without getting it comically, hopelessly wrong, All of it grows directly out of those long centuries of hiding. The statute that protected the wizards also quietly stunted them, raising generation after generation inside a closed and sealed world that came, over time, to regard the vast world outside as strange, lesser, faintly ridiculous, and not quite real. Secrecy was meant to be a shield against danger, and as a shield it served, but it slowly hardened into a set of blinkers that the whole society forgot it was even wearing, narrowing the wizards' vision until they could no longer see the Muggles as anything but a backdrop, a foreign country, a place their own ancestors fled and that they themselves no longer bothered to understand. The wall they built to survive became, over the centuries, the wall that made the worst of them possible. The 65th idea is about an economy that rests entirely on trust in a single bank. The wizarding world has no central bank in the way the Muggle world does, no government mint that the people fund and oversee, no national treasury. Instead, the entire economy runs through Gringotts, the bank run by goblins, where wizards store their gold in deep underground vaults, guarded by dragons and ancient enchantments. Every family of any standing keeps its wealth there. The bank is considered the safest place in the world, so secure that to rob it is thought flatly impossible, and that reputation alone holds the whole system together. But notice what this actually means. The entire financial life of wizarding Britain depends on the goblins, a people the wizards have fought several bloody wars against, look down upon, mistrust and exclude from much of their society, and yet to whom they nonetheless hand all of their gold for safekeeping. The arrangement holds only because both sides need it to hold. The wizards need somewhere truly secure for their money, and the goblins hold the great position of trust and influence that comes with guarding the wealth of an entire nation. It is a fragile balance, built on mutual need rather than any mutual respect or affection. An entire economy resting on the competence and the honesty of a people the wider society otherwise treats as inferior and dangerous. And when that trust is finally broken, when Gringotts is robbed at last, in the heist for the Horcrux, it is not only a theft of one object, it is the shattering of one of the deepest, most foundational certainties the whole wizarding world had quietly been built upon. The proof that the unbreakable bank could in fact be broken, that the safest place in the world was never quite as safe as everyone had needed to believe. An entire civilization's sense of security rested on a single bank run by people it did not even like, and the day that bank was robbed, something more than gold was lost. The 66th idea is about why there is barely any police force and what fills the gap. The wizarding world has auras, who hunt dark wizards, and it has the ministry's various enforcement offices and committees, but it has nothing whatsoever like an ordinary police force. No constables patrolling daily life, no detectives investigating routine crimes, no everyday machinery for keeping order among the general population. For an entire society, that is a genuinely striking absence. So what actually keeps order? What stops the ordinary wizard, day to day, from simply doing as they please? The answer seems to be reputation and family. In a community this small, this old, and this tightly interconnected, where the established families all know one another and gossip travels at the speed of an owl, a person is policed far less by any law than by the constant, inescapable awareness of how they will be seen and how their conduct will reflect on their name. Your family name carries your behavior, for good or ill. A scandal attaches itself not only to you, but to all your relations, down through the generations, the way the Black family tapestry records and burns away every disgrace. People behave themselves, in large part, because the social cost of misbehaving in such a tight, watchful, long-memoried community is enormous and lasting, and falls on everyone who shares your blood. And this works, after a fashion, in calm and ordinary times. But it also means the society has no real, impartial machinery for justice when the watching eyes happen to be the wrong ones, when reputation itself is controlled by the powerful, when an old and respected name can quietly shield a guilty man from all consequence, and a poor or tainted name can damn an innocent one before any question is even asked. A world policed by reputation rather than by law is a world in which the powerful and the well-connected are very nearly untouchable. in which justice bends around the shape of family influence, and that too is quietly part of how the darkness was able to rise. When the people doing the watching are the ones who should be watched, a society that polices itself by reputation has no defense left at all. The 67th idea is about the Muggle Prime Minister and how little he is allowed to know. There is a quiet, uneasy arrangement at the very top of the British government. The Muggle Prime Minister is informed once of the existence of the magical world and is visited thereafter, on rare and usually alarming occasions, by the Minister for Magic, who tells him just enough to keep him from panicking and no more. When mass killings happen, when a bridge collapses through dark magic, when terror spreads through his country, the Prime Minister is given a brief, carefully managed account, told that the wizards are handling it, and told in effect and with great politeness to stay out of the way and ask no further questions. He is given no power whatsoever to act, no ability to help, no real understanding of what is happening to his own people and his own country. He is handed precisely enough information to be frightened and not one scrap more than that, not enough to do anything about any of it. From the wizarding side, this is simply sensible secrecy, the prudent management of a muggle who cannot be allowed to interfere. But sit for a moment with how it must feel from the Prime Minister's side, because the books invite you to. He sits at the head of his government, responsible before his nation for everything that happens within it, and he learns that there is an entire hidden war being fought across his land, with powers he cannot comprehend, claiming lives he must then explain away to the public with invented cover stories about freak storms and gas leaks, while being told courteously that none of it is any of his business and there is nothing he can do. The man supposedly in charge of the whole country is in exactly the matters that most gravely threaten it, kept deliberately and permanently helpless, reduced to a worried, powerless spectator at a catastrophe he is forbidden even to fully see, let alone fight. It is one of the loneliest and most quietly horrifying positions in the entire story, and it belongs to a man who never asked for any of it, and cannot tell a single soul. The 68th idea is about the wizards who edit memories and the history that quietly gets rewritten. When a muggle sees something they should not see, when magic is performed in front of the wrong eyes, the Ministry sends out obliviators, wizards whose entire job is to modify the memories of muggles, erasing whatever they witnessed and replacing it, where needed, with some ordinary, harmless, plausible explanation. This happens routinely, constantly, as a settled matter of policy, wherever and whenever the statute of secrecy is threatened, after every magical mishap in public, every accidental display, every disaster that spills into the non-magical world. Now consider the sheer scale of that across the centuries. Countless muggles, across hundreds of years, have had their memories edited, their genuine experiences deleted, their understanding of their own lives quietly and permanently altered, all without their knowledge and all without their consent, all in the name of keeping the secret safe. How much of recorded muggle history has been shaped, gently and invisibly, by this practice? How many strange events, unexplained happenings, things people swore on their lives they had seen and were later persuaded they must have imagined, were entirely real and were simply erased from the witnesses' minds by a wizard who decided they were better off not knowing. The obliviators raise a deeply unsettling question that the books never quite resolve, about how much of what ordinary people believe about their own world is actually true, and how much of it has been smoothed over, corrected and rewritten by an authority they do not even know exists. An entire population walks around carrying holes in its memory that it cannot detect and will never find. Its history quietly curated by a hidden power, told a calmer, simpler, falser version of events every single time the truth came too close to the magic running underneath everything. The Muggles are not merely kept ignorant of the wizarding world. They are, again and again, actively edited away from ever discovering it, and they have no way of knowing it has happened to them. The 69th idea is about how the magical world disguises its disasters. Whenever dark magic causes a catastrophe out in the Muggle world, a collapsed bridge, a sudden mass death, a building destroyed, a town terrorized, the magical authorities are faced with a problem. They must explain the disaster away to keep the statute of secrecy intact, must give the non-magical world some ordinary, comprehensible reason for what was in truth a magical horror. And so each of these events is dressed up in mundane clothing and handed to the Muggle public as something it can understand and file away. A bridge torn apart by Death Eaters becomes a tragic structural failure, a fault in the engineering. People killed by a giant or a curse become the victims of a gas explosion, a freak hurricane, a senseless accident. The cover stories are written and issued, the newspapers print them, the inquiries reach their tidy false conclusions, and the Muggle world dutifully files each disaster under some ordinary cause and grieves and moves on, never knowing. Which means that woven all through the recorded history of the non-magical world, scattered among all the genuine accidents and real storms and true tragedies, are events that never happened the way the records solemnly insist they did, disasters whose actual causes were magical and whose official explanations were simply invented to hide the magic. Every strangely sudden calamity, every unexplained tragedy, every catastrophe that came out of nowhere sits under a faint and permanent shadow of suspicion once you understand this practice. The magical world has spent centuries quietly laundering its own catastrophes into the Muggle world's ledger of bad luck and bad weather, and the Muggles, never knowing any better, have absorbed each one as just another sad accident in an accident-prone world, never once suspecting that some of the darkest and most baffling days in their own history were authored deliberately by a war they were never permitted to see, and then carefully explained to them as something they could safely forget. The 70th idea closes this stretch with the hospital that hides where no one would look. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries is the Wizarding World's main hospital, the place where the victims of curses, magical accidents, creature attacks, and strange afflictions are taken to be treated, and it hides itself, cleverly and completely, behind the front of an old, closed-down department store in the middle of Muggle London. To enter, a witch or wizard steps up to a dummy in the dusty shop window and speaks to it, and the dummy gives a small nod and beckons them through the glass. Muggles passing by on the busy street see only a derelict, long-abandoned shop, out of business for years, and walk on without a second glance. Inside, healers tend to conditions that the Muggle world has no name for and no possible means of curing. The lingering damage of dark curses, the bizarre injuries inflicted by magical creatures, the strange illnesses that only magic can cause and only magic can mend. It is a perfect, quiet image of how the two worlds overlap without ever truly touching. In the very heart of an ordinary crowded city, behind a shabby disused storefront that thousands of Muggles hurry past every single day without ever once wondering about it, lies a whole bustling hospital full of patients suffering harms those Muggles could not even begin to imagine, attended by healers practicing a medicine those Muggles will never know exists. The sick and the wounded of the magical world are cared for just a few feet from the Muggle pavement, separated from it by nothing more than a concealment charm, a window dummy, and the simple, reliable human habit of never looking twice at a building that appears to have nothing to offer. People with shattered minds, with curse scars that will not heal, with the wreckage of spells gone wrong, lie in beds directly above the heads of shoppers and commuters who will go their whole lives never knowing that the abandoned shop they pass on the way to work is in truth one of the most important buildings in a world running invisibly alongside their own. 70 ideas. The world has grown very dim and gentle around us. Now we come to the heart of the darkness, to Voldemort himself and the people who followed him, and even here the voice stays soft. These are just ideas in the dark. Let them pass over you. The 71st idea is about the Horcrux the villain never meant to make. Voldemort split his soul deliberately, again and again, sealing each torn fragment into an object he chose with great care, each new murder ripping off another piece of himself. He made his Horcruxes intentionally, methodically, as his chosen path to immortality, every one of them planned. But there is one Horcrux he never planned, never wanted, and never even knew that he had created. The night he came to kill the infant Harry, his killing curse rebounded off the protection that Lily's sacrifice had left on the child, and his own body was destroyed in the backlash. In that single instant, With his soul already so unstable and so worn thin from all the tearing he had done to it over the years, a fragment broke loose, and with nothing else nearby to anchor to, it latched onto the only living thing in the room, the baby in the cot. Harry became a Horcrux by accident, an unintended, unwanted vessel carrying a piece of the very soul that had just tried to murder him, and Voldemort never understood this. Not for years and years. He spent more than a decade not knowing that a part of himself lived hidden inside his greatest enemy, that the boy he was hunting carried a sliver of his own soul behind his eyes, that he could not truly die while Harry lived, and could not fully destroy Harry without destroying that piece of himself in the process. The entire long war, all of it, turned on a mistake the villain made in the space of a single second and then never once comprehended, a piece of his soul hiding in plain sight for 17 years behind the green eyes of the very child he feared and hated most, while he searched the whole world over for the secret of his own survival, never once realizing that he had accidentally entrusted part of it to the boy he most wanted dead. The accidental Horcrux is the deepest irony of his whole story. The immortality he so carefully engineered, undone by the one piece of it he made by mistake and never knew was there. The 72nd idea is about why one Horcrux was far more dangerous than the rest. Most of Voldemort's Horcruxes are passive things. The ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, each holds a fragment of his soul, and each can influence and slowly corrupt those who carry it close, can whisper and weigh on the mind, but in the main they simply sit and wait to be found or destroyed. The diary is different, and far, far worse. The diary, which was the very first Horcrux Voldemort ever made, created from the murder of Moaning Myrtle when he was still a schoolboy, does not merely sit and wait. It thinks, it plans, it interacts, holds conversations, charms and manipulates. It can pour its own preserved memory and personality into a living person, draining their life force to make itself more solid and more real. And it can act in the world directly, possessing the young Ginny Weasley, using her hands and her voice to open the Chamber of Secrets, working a long, patient, intelligent scheme entirely on its own, with no input from the rest of Voldemort at all. This is precisely what makes the diary the most dangerous of all the Horcruxes, because the others are anchors, dead weights holding a soul to the world, while the diary is an agent, an active and independent intelligence. Voldemort, in making it, did not just hide a piece of himself. He accidentally created a second self, a fully capable, scheming, charming shard of who he had been at 16, able to manipulate, to drain, to possess, and to come terrifyingly close to resurrecting him, while the main remnant of him was occupied elsewhere, weak and bodiless, and far away. It is the clearest and most frightening glimpse the story offers of what his Horcruxes truly were. Not inert lockets and cups to be hunted down at leisure, but, in this one case at least, a thinking, plotting, fully autonomous fragment of a murderer, perfectly capable of beginning the entire nightmare all over again, from the inside of an innocent schoolgirl's diary, with no one the wiser until it was very nearly too late. The 73rd idea is about the root of the villain's deepest fear, planted in a loveless childhood. Voldemort's defining terror, the single fear that drives every choice he ever makes, is the fear of death. He splits his soul, mutilates himself, commits unthinkable acts, twists his own body into something barely human, all of it to escape dying. Where does a fear that total, that all-consuming, actually come from? Look hard at where he began. Tom Riddle was born in a Muggle orphanage, his mother dead within an hour of his birth, his father long since fled. He grew up with no family at all, no one who loved him, no one whose death he could mourn and learn from, and no one who would ever mourn his. In that bleak orphanage, death was simply an ending, final and absolute and cold, with none of the comforts that soften it for others. No faith, no family gathered round, no love to make the loss bearable, or the prospect of his own end anything but a black void. A child raised with love learns, however dimly and wordlessly, that death can be faced, that the dead are remembered and held, that there is something on the far side of grief worth trusting, that love itself outlasts the body. Tom Riddle learnt none of that, not one piece of it. He learned in his earliest and most formative years that death was the void and nothing more, that nothing came after, that no one ever came back, and that there was no love anywhere strong enough to make any of it endurable. So he set himself, with all the formidable, frightening strength of his will, against death itself, the one enemy his loveless beginning had taught him to dread above every other thing in the world. The villain's monstrous terror of dying is the direct and bitter fruit of a childhood, with no one to die for, and no one to die for him. The empty void of the orphanage hardened over the years into a lifelong, world-destroying war against the simple human fact of an ending. He feared death so completely because he had never once been given a reason to believe it could be anything but the end of everything. The 74th idea is about the snake and the woman she used to be. Nagini is Voldemort's snake, his constant companion, eventually one of his Horcruxes, a great serpent always coiled near him or draped across his shoulders. For most of the story, she seems simply a magical animal, an unusually large, intelligent and obedient snake, a fitting pet for the heir of Slytherin who speaks the language of serpents. The truth about her, revealed much later, is far stranger and far more sorrowful than that. Nagini was not born a snake at all. She was a woman, a maledictus, a carrier of a blood curse passed down through the female line, a curse that would slowly, over the years of her life, transform her permanently and irreversibly into a beast. For a time she lived as a human woman who could turn into a snake at will, performing in a travelling show as a living curiosity, until at last the curse closed over her completely and forever, and she could never again become human. Her mind and her very self, slowly swallowed up and drowned by the animal form she was condemned to wear for the rest of her existence. By the time she belongs to Voldemort, the woman is entirely gone, only the snake remains. So one of the Horcruxes, one of the precious vessels chosen to hold and guard a piece of the villain's torn soul, is in truth the ruined and emptied remnant of a cursed woman who lost her entire humanity to a tragedy she never chose and could not escape. There is a terrible symmetry buried in it that the story never spells out, but clearly intends. Voldemort destroyed his own soul deliberately, by choice, piece by piece, and he keeps a fragment of that mutilated soul hidden inside a being who lost her own self entirely against her will, helplessly, to a curse. The snake forever at his side is not merely a pet or a weapon or a loyal familiar. She is a person who was slowly erased, a woman dissolved by inches into a creature, now carrying inside her stolen serpent's body a piece of the very man who would use up whatever scraps of her were left. The two of them bound together, one soul deliberately shattered and one self accidentally drowned, in a companionship that is, if you understand what she truly is, almost unbearably sad. The 75th idea is about the mark on the follower's arms and what it truly does. The Death Eaters carry the dark mark burned into the skin of their left forearm, a skull with a serpent issuing from its mouth like a tongue, the sign of their allegiance to Voldemort. It is taken at first glance as a badge, a tattoo of belonging, a proud mark of membership in the inner circle of the most feared wizard alive. But the mark is not decoration, and it is not a tattoo. It is a working piece of dark magic, and what it really is, underneath the symbolism, is a leash. When Voldemort wishes to summon his followers, he presses his own wand to the mark on the arm of any one of them, and instantly every Death Eater's mark burns black and searing on their flesh, calling them, and they are expected to drop whatever they are doing, wherever they are in the world, and apparate to his side at once, on pain of his terrible displeasure. The mark also darkens and grows clearer and more solid as Voldemort's power returns over the years, fading to a faint scar in the long stretch when he was gone, and burning back to full blackness as he rose again, so that his servants carry, branded into their own bodies, a living barometer of his strength. So the Death Eaters do not merely wear a symbol of their loyalty, they wear a device by which their master can summon them across any distance, track the precise progress of his own resurrection, and inflict the pain of the burning call upon them whenever he chooses, for any reason or none. Their loyalty is enforced directly through their own skin, a permanent connection that can never be removed or hidden or escaped, that aches when he stirs and screams when he calls. To take the dark mark is not to join a club or pledge a cause. It is to be permanently wired into a master who can reach into your arm from anywhere on earth and command you to come to him instantly for the rest of your life, and who will know the moment you hesitate. The 76th idea is about the most fanatical follower and the love she mistook for devotion. Bellatrix Lestrange is Voldemort's most devoted Death Eater, fanatically, rapturously loyal, gleefully cruel, worshipping her master with an intensity that crosses well over into the religious. She adores him. She hangs on his every word, glories in his attention, longs above all things for his approval, kills for him without a flicker of hesitation, and treats his cause as the whole meaning and purpose of her existence. There is every sign that what Bellatrix feels for Voldemort is, in her own warped and consuming way, love, an obsessive, total, annihilating devotion into which she has poured the entirety of herself, holding nothing back. And this is precisely the deep cruelty of her situation, though she can never see it and would never believe it if told. Voldemort is incapable of love, conceived under a potion rather than affection, his soul torn into pieces. He cannot return any feeling she pours toward him, cannot even truly perceive her devotion as anything more than a useful, well-aimed loyalty, a sharp tool that happens to adore being wielded. Bellatrix worships a man who cannot love her back, who never will, who never could, who values her precisely and only as an instrument, and would sacrifice her without a second thought if it served him. She has given her entire being, her sanity, her marriage, her years in Azkaban, her whole self, to a void that is structurally unable to fill the space she has hollowed out for him inside her. Her fanaticism is the love of someone who has fixed all the devotion she is capable of upon the one person in the entire world least able, by his very nature, to feel it or to give anything back. And the saddest part of all, the part that makes her more tragic than monstrous in the final reckoning, is that she would not have wanted it any other way, having long ago mistaken her own complete self-annihilation in his service for the very highest and purest form of love there is. The 77th idea is about a young man who solved the great secret first and died for it in silence. Dumbledore spent years patiently piecing together the truth of Voldemort's Horcruxes, slowly, painstakingly, gathering scattered memories and clues, and his eventual understanding of them is one of his great quiet achievements. But Dumbledore was not the first person to work it out. Years earlier, a teenage Death Eater named Regulus Black, the younger brother of Sirius, had figured out enough of the terrible secret to act on it. Regulus had lent his family's house elf, Creature, to Voldemort, who had used the elf to test the deadly defenses guarding the Locket Horcrux in its hidden cave, and then callously left him there to die in the dark water. Creature, ordered home by an earlier command, survived, and from the elf's anguished account, Regulus understood what his master had truly done, that Voldemort had made a Horcrux, that he had treated a faithful, devoted creature as nothing more than disposable equipment to be used up and discarded. And Regulus, a frightened young man who had joined the Death Eaters in misguided family pride and had come too late to regret it bitterly, decided to do something about it, alone, knowing it would almost certainly cost him his life. He took Creature back to that hidden cave. He drank the potion of despair that guarded the locket, the same potion that had nearly killed the elf. He gave Creature a real locket to swap for the true Horcrux, ordered the elf to take the real one home and find a way to destroy it, and ordered him too to leave him behind. And so Regulus Black died there in the dark beneath the lake, alone, dragged under by the creatures in the black water, having uncovered the deepest secret of the most dangerous wizard alive before the greatest wizard of the age had managed it. And no one knew. No statue was ever raised to him. No one mourned him as a hero, because no one understood what he had done. For years his sacrifice remained a complete and total secret, the courage of a frightened boy who saw the truth first and gave his life trying to begin undoing it, remembered by no one in all the world except a single grieving, broken-hearted house elf who could not even properly explain to anyone what his young master had died for. The war had heroes that nobody ever heard of, and Regulus was one of the very greatest of them. His courage swallowed whole, by the same dark, silent water that took his body. The 78th idea is about a Patronus that never changed its shape and the love that fixed it. A Patronus, the silver guardian a wizard conjures against dementors, takes the form of an animal, and that form can change over the course of a person's life as they themselves change, especially after some great emotional upheaval. Tonks's Patronus changes its shape when she falls in love, but Severus Snape's Patronus is a doe, and it stays a doe, unchanged, for the entire length of his bitter, divided, secret life. The doe matters enormously because it is the exact match of the Patronus of Lily Potter, whose own form was a doe, paired in life with the stag that was the Patronus of James. Snape loved Lily from childhood. He loved her after she chose another man over him, loved her after she stopped speaking to him, loved her after she married James, loved her after she died, loved her with a constancy and a single-mindedness that shaped every choice of his long, unhappy, double-dealing life. And his Patronus, which is the purest possible expression of a person's deepest happiness and truest self, took the shape of the woman he loved and never for one moment stopped loving, and never changed because his love itself never changed. When Dumbledore, late in the story, sees that Snape's Patronus is still a doe after all these years and asks him, quietly, after all this time, and Snape answers simply, always, it is the whole of the man laid bare in a single word. His love for Lily was the one fixed and unmoving thing in him, the single constant that all the years and all the bitterness and all the terrible things he did in service of his double game never altered or touched. His Patronus could not become anything else, could not shift into some new shape, reflecting a new love or a healed heart, because his heart had settled itself on Lily decades before and would never, ever move again. The most reliable and honest measure of love anywhere in this world turns out to be the shape of the light a person can summon against the dark, and Snape's light wore the shape of Lily Potter from the day he first learned to cast it until the day he died with her son's eyes, her eyes, looking down at him. The 79th idea is about how splitting his soul made the villain blind to everyone else. Each time Voldemort made a Horcrux, he tore his soul, and each tearing damaged him further, not only magically but in his very capacity to feel, to understand, to connect with another living being. By the end he had split his soul into more pieces than anyone in history had ever attempted, and the cost of it was a being who could barely be called human any longer, in his appearance, with the flattened snake-like face and the red eyes, and in his spirit, which had been whittled down to almost nothing recognizably human at all. And this maiming, this deliberate self-mutilation, explains one of his greatest and most fatal weaknesses, his total, uncomprehending blindness to the motives of other people. Voldemort cannot understand love or loyalty given freely without coercion, or self-sacrifice, or mercy, or the choice to die so that another might live. He dismisses all of these, genuinely and consistently, as foolishness, as weakness, as sentimentality beneath his notice, and again across the story, this blindness costs him everything. He cannot conceive that Lily's love could leave a real working protection on her son. The idea that Snape might be playing a deep and patient game for years out of love for a dead woman never once occurs to him, and it does not enter his mind that a mother, Narcissa, might lie straight to his face to protect her child. The endless tearing of his soul did not only make him difficult to kill, it hollowed out, piece by piece, the very part of him that could read and predict the human heart, leaving him completely unable to see, let alone counter, the one force that would ultimately destroy him. He could read ambition perfectly, and fear, and greed, and self-interest, because those were all he had left inside himself to read others with. But the things that actually move people, the things that quietly won the entire war against him, were simply invisible to him, undetectable, because he had cut every last trace of them out of his own soul, deliberately, over a lifetime, until there was nothing left inside him capable of recognizing them in anyone else. The 80th idea closes this stretch by asking why the villain chose the particular objects he did. Voldemort's Horcruxes are not a random assortment of objects. They are Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, the ring of his gaunt ancestors, the diary of his own school days, and his snake. Look at that list again. Each one is a trophy. The locket and the cup and the diadem are precious, legendary relics of 3 of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, treasures of immense historical and symbolic weight, and Voldemort hunted each of them down, schemed and murdered to claim them, and turned each into a vessel for a piece of his torn soul. The ring binds him to the bloodline of Salazar Slytherin himself through the Gaunts. Even the diary is a deliberate memorial to the moment he first opened the Chamber of Secrets and proved to himself that he was Slytherin's true heir. He did not choose ordinary, forgettable objects to hide his soul in, the way a sensible man hiding something precious would choose the dullest possible container, the thing no one would ever look at twice. He chose the most meaningful, most prestigious, most legacy-laden items he could find or seize in the entire wizarding world, because to Voldemort, mere immortality was never enough on its own. The hiding places had to honor his greatness. They had to tie him to the grandeur and the history of the school he idolized, to the founders he revered, to the ancient bloodline he was so proud to descend from. They had to be worthy, in his own estimation, of containing pieces of a soul as important and as special as he believed his own to be. His towering vanity is written directly into the very means of his survival. Even in the most secret and most defensive act of his entire life, the hiding of his soul against destruction, he could not resist the urge to make each hiding place a monument to himself. And that, in the end, is exactly what allows them to be found and destroyed, because a man who hides the pieces of his soul inside the famous treasures of the school he worshipped has, without realizing it, left a clear and traceable trail of his own pride for a patient enough enemy to follow, one prestigious relic at a time, all the way to his heart. 80 ideas now, and only the quietest part of the night remains. We've walked through objects and ghosts, blood and rules, creatures and the castle, the ministry and the dark. What's left is the long game of one old man, and then the loose threads that tie the whole thing closed. The voice stays low. There's nowhere to be but here, drifting. The 81st idea is the one that reframes the entire story, and it is about what Dumbledore knew from the start. For most of the series, Dumbledore appears as a protector, a mentor guiding Harry, keeping him safe, preparing him to face Voldemort and win. The truth, when it comes, is harder and stranger. Dumbledore worked out, fairly early, that the night Voldemort's curse rebounded, a fragment of Voldemort's soul had attached itself to Harry, that Harry himself was a Horcrux, an unintended vessel carrying a piece of the enemy, and Dumbledore understood the terrible consequence of this. As long as that fragment lived inside Harry, Voldemort could not truly die. The Horcrux in the boy had to be destroyed, and the only way to destroy it, Dumbledore believed, was for Harry to die, or at least to walk willingly into death at Voldemort's hand, so that the piece of soul within him would be killed and Voldemort made mortal at last. So Dumbledore raised Harry all those years with this knowledge held close. He was preparing the boy not only to fight but to die at the right moment for the cause. He cultivated Harry's courage, his sense of duty, his willingness to sacrifice himself for others, knowing that one day he would need Harry to walk calmly to his own death and let it happen. Snape, when he learns this, is horrified and accuses Dumbledore of raising the boy like an animal for slaughter, and Dumbledore does not deny it. He had grown to love Harry, genuinely, and still he had been preparing him the whole time for the moment he would have to die. It is the heaviest thing in the entire story, the realization that the kindly old protector was also, all along, a general preparing a beloved soldier for a sacrifice the soldier could not know was coming, because if Harry had known too soon, he might not have been able to do it when the time came. The 82nd idea is about a choice made on a doorstep, love traded for safety. After the Potters were killed, Dumbledore had to decide where the orphaned Harry would live. He chose the Dursleys, Petunia's family, Lily's only living blood relatives, despite knowing perfectly well what kind of people they were, despite knowing they despised magic and everything to do with it, and would never love the boy left on their doorstep. He left the infant Harry there in the night with a letter tucked into his blankets, and in doing so consigned him to 10 long years of neglect, coldness, and small daily cruelties in a house that did not want him. Why would Dumbledore, who could have placed Harry with any number of warm and loving wizarding families who would have raised him as their own and told him every day who his parents were, choose this instead? The answer is blood magic, and it is a hard one. Lily's dying sacrifice had created a protection that lived on in Harry's very blood, and that protection could be sealed, renewed, and made nearly impregnable by placing Harry in the home of his mother's blood relative, so that as long as he could call that house his home, no servant of Voldemort could reach him or harm him there. Dumbledore chose the protection over the love. He chose, with full knowledge of what he was doing, to give Harry a childhood of cold neglect in a hostile house, in exchange for a shield strong enough to keep him alive through the years when Voldemort's followers were still at large and still hunting. It was a calculated trade, a deliberate decision that the boy's survival mattered more than the boy's happiness, that 10 years of misery were an acceptable price for a protection nothing could break. Dumbledore knew exactly what he was condemning Harry to, knew the cupboard under the stairs, and the unkindness and the loneliness all lay ahead, and he did it anyway, because the loneliness would keep him breathing. There is no honest way to read that choice that makes it only wise or only cruel. It was both at once, completely, which is what makes it one of the truest things Dumbledore ever did. The 83rd idea is about the deepest reason Dumbledore trusted Snape, and the one thing that could not be faked. Dumbledore trusted Severus Snape completely, against all outward appearances, against the open doubts of nearly everyone around him, against Snape's known history as a Death Eater who had once served Voldemort willingly. Many in the Order of the Phoenix thought Dumbledore a sentimental old fool for it, and said so, and the true basis of that absolute trust, when it is finally laid bare, comes down to a single moment, a single unfakeable thing. Snape had loved Lily Potter since they were children together, loved her with a quiet, hopeless constancy through all the years she chose someone else. And when Snape learnt that the information he himself had carried to Voldemort, the partial prophecy he had overheard and reported, had led directly to Lily's death, that he had with his own hands helped to destroy the one person he had ever truly loved in his life, he was utterly shattered by it. He came to Dumbledore in an agony of grief and self-loathing so total, so consuming, that it remade him from the inside out, and from the wreckage of it sprang his absolute willingness to do anything, risk anything, suffer anything, to protect Lily's son, the only piece of her left in all the world. Dumbledore saw that grief, looked straight into it, and understood at once that it could not possibly be performed or faked. A man can fake loyalty, he can fake repentance, fake conversion, fake allegiance to a cause. But the raw, annihilating, lifelong grief that Snape carried for Lily was real in a way no spy on Earth could ever counterfeit, and Dumbledore knew it. He trusted Snape not because Snape was a good man, for Snape remained bitter, cruel, petty, and unkind in 100 small ways right to the end. He trusted Snape because Snape's love for Lily and his grief at her death were the one true and unbreakable thing left in him, the fixed point around which everything else in his ruined life turned, and Dumbledore staked the entire outcome of the war on the certainty that a heart broken that completely does not lie about the thing that broke it, and he was right. The 84th idea is about a wand of terrible power and a man's plan to make it die with him. The Elder Wand is the most powerful wand in existence, the Death Stick, said to win every duel for its master, and its history is a trail of murder, each owner killing or defeating the last to claim it. Whoever truly masters the wand becomes nearly unbeatable, which is exactly why the wand has caused so much death across the centuries. Every ambitious wizard wanting it, killing for it, dying for it. Dumbledore came to possess the Elder Wand, having defeated the dark wizard Grindelwald who held it before. And Dumbledore, understanding the curse of the thing, formed a plan to end the bloody chain of conquest. His intention was to die undefeated, to arrange his own death in such a way that the wand's power would be broken, that no one would have won it from him by conquest, and so its long line of violent ownership would simply end. By choosing the time and manner of his death, by having it come not as a defeat in combat, but as a planned act with Snape, Dumbledore meant for the Elder Wand's allegiance to die with him. The power finally laid to rest, the wand made just a wand again. The plan went awry, as such plans do, the allegiance passing in ways he had not foreseen, but the intention behind it is one of the most selfless things he ever attempted. He held the most powerful weapon in the world, and his great wish for it was that it should lose its power forever, that the killing should stop, that the wand that had caused 1,000 years of murder should claim no more victims after him. He wanted to be the last man it ever destroyed. The 85th idea is about the memories Dumbledore chose to show, and the lesson hidden in the choosing. Throughout Harry's 6th year, Dumbledore takes him repeatedly into the Pensieve, the stone basin that lets a person step inside and revisit a stored memory. And there he shows Harry scene after scene from Voldemort's past, the grim orphanage, the cold and brilliant young Tom Riddle, the squalid Gaunt family, the slow gathering of the Horcruxes. It feels, while it is happening, like an investigation, like the two of them are uncovering the truth together, side by side, piecing out a mystery. But notice that Dumbledore controls entirely which memories Harry is shown, and in what order, and where each session begins and ends. He is not handing Harry the raw, unfiltered record and letting him make of it what he will. He is selecting, sequencing, framing, building a deliberate case, shaping Harry's whole understanding of Voldemort step by careful step. The Pensieve sessions are not an open inquiry between equals. They are a lesson plan, meticulously designed by Dumbledore to lead Harry to specific conclusions, to make him understand Voldemort's nature, his fears, his Horcruxes, and above all his weaknesses, in exactly the way Dumbledore needs him to understand them for what is to come. Even the single most important memory, the one from Slughorn that confirms how many times Voldemort split his soul, Dumbledore does not simply show him, he sets Harry the task of retrieving it himself, turning Harry's own effort and ingenuity into part of the teaching so that the lesson would stick the harder for having been earned. Dumbledore was teaching even when it looked for all the world like he was merely sharing, merely confiding. Every memory he chose to show was a choice, every sequence a design, the whole long process a patient, guided education aimed squarely at preparing Harry for the war and the sacrifice ahead, disguised as two friends quietly looking at the past together. The old teacher was teaching to the very last, and for that final year his classroom was the memories of a murderer, arranged just so, and his only pupil never quite realized he was being taught. The 86th idea is about a blackened hand and the longing that destroyed Dumbledore's caution. In his final year, Dumbledore's right hand is withered and blackened, dead-looking, clearly the result of some terrible injury or curse that is slowly killing him. The story behind it is this. Dumbledore had found the Ring of the Gaunts, which held both a Horcrux and, set into it, the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. The ring was cursed, lethally, designed to destroy whoever put it on, and Dumbledore, who knew better than anyone the danger of such an object, who had spent his life warning others against exactly this kind of temptation, put it on anyway. He did it because the Resurrection Stone offered the one thing he had longed for across his whole life, the chance to see again the family he had lost, his mother and especially his sister Ariana, whose death he blamed himself for, whose loss had haunted every decade since. For one mad moment the longing overpowered the wisdom, and the greatest, most careful wizard of the age slipped the cursed ring onto his finger, hoping to beg forgiveness from the dead, and the curse took hold and began to kill him. His blackened hand is the visible mark of his one great weakness, the proof that even Dumbledore, who understood the danger of the Hallows better than anyone alive, could not resist the pull of seeing his lost sister again. The curse that was killing him was the price of a grief he had carried for 100 years, and a love that for one fatal instant mattered to him more than his own life. Even the wisest man in the world had a wound that could make him foolish, and it wore the face of the little sister he could not save. The 87th idea is about the highest office in the wizarding world and why Dumbledore would never take it. Dumbledore was offered the position of Minister for Magic more than once, the most powerful official role in the wizarding world, and he refused it every time, choosing to remain merely a headmaster at a school. To many this seemed like humility or eccentricity, a great man content with a smaller post. The real reason is darker and more honest. Dumbledore did not trust himself with power. In his youth, he had been seduced by dreams of wizard dominance, had befriended the dark wizard Grindelwald, had been intoxicated by visions of remaking the world with magical might for what he told himself was the greater good. And that flirtation with power had ended in catastrophe and the death of his sister. From that ruin, Dumbledore learned a lesson about himself that he never forgot. He knew that power was his particular temptation, the thing he most craved and least trusted himself to wield, the appetite that, if indulged, could turn even him into something terrible. So he spent his life deliberately keeping himself away from it, refusing the offices that would have placed real power in his hands, choosing the limited authority of a schoolmaster precisely because it was limited. His refusal of the ministry was not modesty, it was a man who had seen the worst version of himself and spent the rest of his life making sure that version never got the chance to come back, keeping his own dangerous hunger starved on purpose, because he understood that the most dangerous thing about him was what he might do if he ever stopped holding himself in check. The 88th idea is about a mirror placed as a test and a headmaster who already knew the answer. In Harry's first year, hidden in an abandoned classroom, stands the Mirror of Erised, which shows the deepest desire of whoever looks into it. Harry finds it by chance, or so it seems, and sees his dead parents standing beside him, and returns night after night to gaze at the family he never had. Dumbledore finds him there and gently explains the mirror's nature, that it shows not truth but longing, and that men have wasted away before it, entranced by visions of what they want most. But Dumbledore's involvement runs deeper than a chance encounter. The mirror was placed where Harry could find it, and Dumbledore had every reason to know what Harry would see in it, the family stolen from him, the parents he ached for. It functioned as a kind of test of Harry's heart, a way of seeing what the boy most deeply wanted. And later, the mirror is used to guard the Philosopher's Stone, with a clever enchantment by which only a person who wanted to find the stone but not to use it, who desired it for no selfish purpose, could retrieve it. Dumbledore designed that protection, and he designed it knowing it would test the character of whoever reached it. The Mirror of Erised is not just a magical curiosity, it is one of Dumbledore's instruments for reading the human heart, placed and used to reveal what people truly want, and through that, who they truly are. He learnt a great deal about Harry from what the boy chose to gaze at in the dark, and from the fact that in the end, Harry could want the stone without wanting to use it, which told Dumbledore the boy's heart was sound. The 89th idea is about a golden ball that would not open until the right moment, and a message hidden inside delay. In his will, Dumbledore leaves Harry the very first snitch he ever caught, the small golden winged ball from Harry's first Quidditch match, caught not by hand, but nearly swallowed. Snitches have a kind of memory of the first person to touch them, a flesh memory, which is why this one is significant, and when Harry finally puts it to his lips, words appear on it. I open at the close. For most of the final book, Harry cannot get the snitch to open, cannot understand what it holds or how to reach it. The meaning becomes clear only at the very end. The snitch held the resurrection stone, the means to face death with his lost loved ones beside him, and it would only open at the close, meaning the moment Harry accepted his own death, the moment he walked into the forest to let Voldemort kill him, and finally understood and accepted that he had to die. Only then, with the words "I am about to die" on his heart, did the snitch open and yield the stone, so that his parents and Sirius and Lupin could walk beside him through his last steps. Dumbledore had timed the gift perfectly, had locked the comfort of the stone behind the one condition that mattered, the acceptance of death, so that Harry would receive it, not as a way to escape dying, but as a way to face it with courage, surrounded by love, in the final moments, before he gave his life. The old man reached out from beyond his own death to make sure that when Harry walked to his, he would not have to walk alone. The 90th idea closes this stretch with a small, sly piece of Dumbledore's cunning, the hiring of a fraud on purpose. The post of defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts is cursed, a fact established beyond doubt by the series, in which no teacher of the subject lasts more than a single year before death, disgrace, madness, or worse removes them. The curse, it is strongly implied, was laid by Voldemort himself, after Dumbledore refused to give him the job. Dumbledore knew about the curse, So consider the year he hired Gilderoy Lockhart, a vain, useless fraud who had never accomplished any of the heroic deeds he claimed, who had built his fame entirely by stealing other wizards' stories and erasing their memories. Why would Dumbledore appoint such an obvious charlatan to such an important post? One reading is that Dumbledore, knowing the position was cursed, and that whoever held it would be lost within the year, deliberately chose a candidate whose loss would cost the school nothing. Lockhart was a fraud whose removal would deprive the students of nothing real, since he had nothing real to teach them. By giving the cursed post to a man with no genuine ability, Dumbledore spent the curse's yearly price on someone whose loss was no loss at all, protecting more capable wizards from the doomed position while exposing Lockhart by his own fraud in the bargain. It is a small example of the way Dumbledore thought, always several moves ahead, willing to use even a self-important fake as a piece on the board, arranging matters so that the inevitable yearly casualty of the cursed post fell on a man the world would not miss. 90 ideas. We are almost at the end of the long night now. 10 left, the loose threads, the quiet endings, the small truths that tie the whole thing together. Let them be the last things you hear before sleep takes you fully. The 91st idea returns to that cursed teaching post and follows it across the whole series, a slow revenge playing out for decades. The defense against the dark arts curse is worth dwelling on because it shows how long and how patiently Voldemort's malice could work. As a young man, Tom Riddle asked Dumbledore for the defense post and was refused, Dumbledore seeing too clearly what Riddle was becoming. And from that rejection, it is believed, Riddle cursed the position itself so that no one would ever hold it for long. Trace the teachers across the years and the curse is undeniable. One is revealed to be hosting Voldemort himself and dies. One has his memory destroyed by his own backfiring spell. One is exposed as a werewolf and forced to resign. One turns out to be a Death Eater in disguise and is taken away. One is driven out by the students. One dies. Year after year, without fail, the defense teacher is gone by summer, removed by some disaster, never lasting into a second year. It is a curse that has held for decades, an act of spite from a rejected young man that goes on punishing the school long after he has become something barely human, depriving generations of students of consistent teaching in the very subject they most needed to face him. The longevity of it is the point. Voldemort's hatred did not burn out. It was patient, structural, woven into the institution itself, a grudge that kept on working automatically, year after year, a small constant proof that he never forgot a slight and never stopped making the world pay for it, even in the one place that had shaped him. The 92nd idea is about a half-measle cat who knew a rat for what it was. Crookshanks is Hermione's cat, large, bandy-legged, squashed-faced, and bad-tempered, bought from a magical menagerie where he had languished unsold for a long time, too odd-looking for anyone to want. From the very moment Crookshanks arrives, he is fixated on Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, hunting him relentlessly, attacking, stalking, lying in wait, refusing to leave the poor creature alone, to the point that it causes a serious and lasting quarrel between Ron and Hermione. Ron is furious, certain the cat is simply a vicious brute trying to eat his beloved old pet. But Crookshanks is no ordinary cat. He is part Kneazle, that magical breed gifted with a powerful instinct for detecting people who are suspicious, untrustworthy, or hiding something. And what Crookshanks sensed about Scabbers was the very truth that not one of the humans around him could see. Scabbers was not a rat at all. He was Peter Pettigrew, the traitor who had betrayed the Potters to their deaths and then faked his own murder, and who had spent 12 long years hiding in the form of a fat, aging rat in the Weasley household, sleeping in their boys' beds, eating at their table, a murderer concealed as a family pet. Crookshanks knew. His Kneazle blood detected the deep wrongness in that rat, the human deceit wearing an animal's shape, the betrayer in hiding, and he acted on it the only way a cat possibly can, by hunting relentlessly the thing that should not be. Crookshanks even worked, in his patient animal way, alongside the great black dog who was the disguised Sirius Black, the two of them cooperating to corner and expose the rat that everyone else trusted. The cat that the whole household had written off as merely ill-tempered and aggressive was, in truth, the only one under that roof who could see the murderer living quietly among them, and he spent his time trying, with claws and stubbornness and no way at all to explain himself, to drag a 12-year-old truth into the light against the flat disbelief of every human he was trying to warn. The 93rd idea is about the moment the hero very nearly went to the house of the villain. When Harry first arrives at Hogwarts and is sorted, the sorting hat takes an unusually long time over him, and what it tells him quietly in his own head is striking. It says he would do well in Slytherin, that Slytherin would help him on the way to greatness, that there is the makings of a great wizard in him, and the cunning and the thirst to prove himself that Slytherin prizes. Harry, frightened by everything he has heard about that house and the dark wizards it produced, pleads silently, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin," and the hat, honouring his choice, places him in Gryffindor instead. For years this seems like the hat simply recognising Harry's ambition, but the deeper reason emerges later. A fragment of Voldemort's soul lived inside Harry, the accidental Horcrux, and with it came traces of Voldemort's own qualities, his ability to speak to snakes, flashes of his temperament, a thread of connection to the Dark Lord's mind. The hat, weighing Harry, sensed that Slytherinness in him, the piece of Voldemort woven into the boy, and responded to it, drawn to place him where that part of him belonged. Harry came within a whispered plea of being sorted into the house of the man who killed his parents, because a piece of that man was living inside him, and the only thing that saved him from it was his own free choice to refuse. It is the clearest early sign of the truth that would not be revealed for years, that Harry carried his enemy within him, and it is also the first proof of the lesson Dumbledore would later teach him, that it is our choices, far more than our abilities or our blood, or even the soul fragments we carry, that show what we truly are. The 94th idea is about a fraud of a fortune teller who twice told the absolute truth without knowing it. Sybil Trelawney teaches divination, and she is, by very nearly every measure available to us, a fraud given to vague and grandiose predictions, theatrical pronouncements of doom, obvious cold reading and guesswork, draped in shawls and beads and a haze of cooking sherry, mocked by the more serious staff, and disbelieved even by most of her own students. She predicts a violent death for someone almost every single lesson, and is almost always wrong. And yet exactly twice in her entire life, Trelawney has made a real prophecy, a true one, and on both of those occasions something utterly unlike her ordinary performance took hold of her. She entered a strange, stiff trance, her eyes unfocused, and spoke in a harsh, rasping voice, completely unlike her own affected, breathy classroom manner, and afterward, both times, she had no memory whatsoever of having spoken at all. The first was the great prophecy about the boy who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, the prophecy that doomed the Potters and set this entire vast story into motion, delivered to Dumbledore in a back room during what was meant to be a simple job interview, with the young Snape listening at the door and carrying away the fragment that would get Lily killed. The second she makes years later, directly in front of Harry, foretelling the escape and return of Voldemort's servant that very night. Both times the genuine gift moved through her without her knowledge or her will, took her over completely for a moment, and then released her, leaving no trace behind. This is the strange and rather poignant truth of Trelawney. She is a real seer, descended from a famous and genuinely gifted one, but the gift does not belong to her in any way she can command or even feel. It merely passes through her, rarely, taking her over without warning and then departing. And in all the long stretches of empty time between those two true prophecies, she fills the silence with fakery and theatrics and guesswork, because the real gift is not hers to summon at will, only hers to occasionally be used by, and the saddest part is that she cannot ever tell which one she is being, the fraud or the prophet, because in the rare moments when the real gift speaks through her, she is not present to hear it. The 95th idea is about a letter a little girl once wrote, and an envy that curdled over a lifetime. Petunia Dursley, Harry's aunt, despises magic with a bitterness that seems excessive even for a frightened, conventional woman. She treats the word itself as an obscenity, refuses to speak of her dead sister, punishes Harry for the smallest sign of the abnormality she loathes. The usual reading is simple prejudice and fear, but there is a memory that complicates it entirely. As a girl, before Lily went off to Hogwarts and into the magical world, Petunia secretly wrote a letter to Dumbledore, begging to be allowed to attend the school too, longing to go where her sister was going, desperate not to be left behind in the ordinary world. Dumbledore wrote back, kindly, explaining that she could not come, that the school was not for her, that she had no magic in her. Petunia was refused. She had wanted magic, had reached for it, had asked to be let in, and had been told, gently but finally, that she did not belong. And that refusal, that childhood longing, turned to rejection, soured over the years into the hard, hateful bitterness we meet in her as an adult. Her contempt for magic is not really contempt. It is the scar tissue over an old wound, the resentment of a girl who wanted desperately to be special like her sister and was told she never could be, who watched Lily walk into a wonderful world and close the door behind her, and who spent the rest of her life pretending she had never wanted to follow, hating the things she could not have, so that she would not have to admit how much she had once longed for it. Her cruelty to Harry is in part the cruelty of envy that has had decades to harden into stone. The 96th idea is about a strange, bright station at the edge of death, and the broken thing weeping under a bench. When Harry walks into the forest and lets Voldemort strike him down with the killing curse, he does not simply die and end. He finds himself in a strange place that resembles King's Cross Station, bright and clean and white and entirely empty, where he meets Dumbledore, restored and whole, and the two of them talk at length about everything that has happened and everything still to come. But there is something else present in that bright station, something Harry notices early and instinctively recoils from. Under a bench, or huddled nearby, lies a small, hideous, flayed-looking creature, raw and red and wounded, like a terribly injured child, whimpering and twitching, a thing so pitiful and so awful at once that Harry cannot bear to look at it or go near it. When he asks if there is anything he can do to help it, Dumbledore tells him, gently and finally, that there is not, that it is beyond anyone's help. And yet exactly twice in her entire life, Trelawney has made a real prophecy, a true one, and on both of those occasions something utterly unlike her ordinary performance took hold of her. She entered a strange, stiff trance, her eyes unfocused, and spoke in a harsh, rasping voice, completely unlike her own affected, breathy classroom manner, and afterward, both times she had no memory. That broken, whimpering creature is the fragment of Voldemort's soul, the very piece that had lived inside Harry all those years as the accidental Horcrux, now killed by Voldemort's own rebounding curse, dying there in that threshold place between life and death. It is what a torn, mutilated, loveless soul actually looks like when it is finally stripped of everything and exposed, a maimed and pitiable scrap, the seventh part of a man who tore himself apart, reduced to a flayed thing whimpering under a bench, that even the dead cannot comfort or save. And the contrast between the two of them, in that one shared place, is the whole quiet point of the scene. Harry, who chose to walk willingly to his own death for the sake of others, arrives in that bright, clean station whole, calm, and at peace, free to walk onward into death, or to choose to return to life. The peace of Voldemort, by contrast, the man who tore his soul into pieces precisely in order to escape death, ends as that small flayed horror beneath the bench, unwanted and unhelpable, dying utterly alone with no one to mourn it. The same threshold that gives Harry peace and a choice gives Voldemort's fragment nothing but its final, miserable, solitary end, and the entire difference between those two fates is written in what each of them had made, across a whole lifetime of choices, of his own one soul. The 97th idea is about an ending 19 years later, and the prejudices that outlived the war. The story ends with a glimpse of the future. 19 years on, the surviving characters, now grown, sending their own children off to Hogwarts from the same platform where they once departed. It is a warm and peaceful scene, the war long over, a new generation boarding the train. But look closely, and the piece is not quite complete. There is still talk of houses and rivalries, still a faint anxiety in young Albus Potter about being sorted into Slytherin, still the sense that the old divisions, Gryffindor and Slytherin, the suspicion of certain families, have not entirely vanished. The wizarding world changed its laws after the war, surely, ended the persecution, dismantled the regime of blood purity, freed those who had been oppressed. But laws change faster than hearts. The deep ingrained prejudices, the assumptions about which house means what, which family means what, which blood means what, do not dissolve simply because a war was won and a villain defeated. They persist, softened perhaps, pushed to the margins, but present, passed quietly to the next generation in the small anxieties and old habits of their parents. The ending is genuinely happy, and it is also honest about the limits of victory. You can defeat the Dark Wizard, you can win the war. You cannot, in a single generation, fully cleanse a society of the prejudices that produced him, and the best you can do is raise children who carry a little less of it than you did, and hope the platform is a little kinder each time the train pulls away. The 98th idea is about why one strange girl believes in things no one else can see. Luna Lovegood is unlike anyone else at Hogwarts. Serene, dreamy, utterly unbothered by mockery, a believer in creatures and conspiracies that no one else accepts, wearing radish earrings and reading the magazine her father edits full of outlandish claims. The other students think her mad and call her loony, and she bears it all with a gentle, unshakable calm. It would be easy to take Luna as simply eccentric, a bit of whimsy, but there is a grief underneath her strangeness. Luna's mother was a witch who loved experimenting with spells, pushing at the edges of magic, trying things others would not, and one day one of her experiments went wrong and killed her, with young Luna watching it happen. Luna saw her mother die in front of her as a small child. She is one of the ones who can see the Thestrals, and her whole way of being in the world, her openness to the impossible, her faith in things unseen and unproven, her refusal to dismiss what others cannot perceive, grows in part from that loss. A girl who watched her mother die exploring the boundaries of the believable does not find it easy to mock the unbelievable. Luna believes in the creatures no one can find and the truths no one will confirm, because she learned far too young that the world is stranger and more fragile than the confident people around her think, that things unseen can still be real, that the people you love can vanish in an instant into a place you cannot follow. Her dreaminess is not foolishness. It is the gentle shape that an early, terrible grief took in a kind and unusual mind, a way of staying open to a mother who slipped through one of those boundaries and did not come back. The 99th idea is about the great puzzle of the most powerful wand, settled not by murder, but by a simple, almost accidental act. For the whole final stretch of the story, the question of who truly masters the Elder Wand hangs over everything, because Voldemort believes that possessing the wand will make him invincible, and he goes to terrible lengths to claim it, even murdering Snape because he thinks Snape is its master. But Voldemort has the chain of ownership wrong, and the truth of it is almost mundane, which is the deep joke of the whole thing. The Elder Wand's allegiance does not pass by ownership or by murder. It passes by conquest, by disarming, by the simple act of defeating the previous master, and it can happen without anyone intending it or even realizing it has occurred. Dumbledore was the wand's master, but before Snape ever entered the picture, a teenage Draco Malfoy had disarmed Dumbledore by accident in the moment before Dumbledore's death, and so the wand's allegiance passed not to the man who killed Dumbledore, but to the boy who had merely disarmed him. And then Harry, later, physically overpowered and disarmed Draco, taking his wand in a scuffle, and so the Elder Wand's allegiance passed again to Harry through nothing more dramatic than wrestling a wand out of another boy's hand. So when Voldemort finally faces Harry and casts the killing curse with the Elder Wand, the wand will not work properly against its own true master, and Voldemort's curse rebounds and kills him. The most powerful wand in the world, the prize men had murdered for across 1,000 years, was won in the end by a teenager grabbing another teenager's wand during a fight, and the great dark wizard was undone because he never understood that a wand could change hands through a simple disarming, that the deepest magic of the death stick obeyed not killing but a quieter law, and that all his slaughter to claim it had been pointed at the wrong man the entire time. The 100th idea is the one that holds all the others, the spine of the whole story, carved on a gravestone. When Harry returns to the village where his parents died and visits their grave, he finds words carved on the headstone that he does not at first understand and that trouble him. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. To Harry, in his grief and confusion, it sounds almost like something Voldemort might believe, a creed of conquering death, and it unsettles him until Hermione explains that it does not mean defeating death by escaping it, but living beyond it. The idea that death is not the true end. That single line turns out to be the secret heart of the entire story. Everything in it circles around death and how to face it. Voldemort's whole life is an attempt to defeat death by escaping it, by tearing his soul apart, by refusing it at any cost, and that refusal is precisely what destroys him and everyone around him. Dumbledore, by contrast, comes to accept death as part of life, even as the next great adventure, and dies on his own terms for a purpose larger than himself. And Harry, the true heir of the three brothers, the master of the Hallows, achieves what neither the eldest nor the middle brother could, because he becomes, in spirit, the youngest brother of the tale, the one who did not try to cheat death or command it, but who, when his time came, greeted death as an old friend and went with it willingly. The whole sprawling story, all the magic and the houses and the wands and the wars, comes down to this one quiet truth carved on a stone in a country churchyard. The way to defeat death is not to flee it forever, tearing yourself to pieces in the running, but to accept it, to love enough to die for others, and to trust that what you have given and whom you have loved will outlast you. That is the last enemy, and it is destroyed not by power, but by acceptance. And that is the lesson the boy learned that the dark wizard never could, and it is why one of them lies in peace, and the other ended as a whimpering scrap under a bench in a bright and empty station at the edge of the world. That's all 100. 100 small ideas about a world you already knew, told slowly, in the dark, to carry you down into sleep. There's nothing to remember and nothing to do now. The castle is quiet. The lake is still. The train has long since pulled away from the platform, and everyone is where they belong. If any of this helped you rest, subscribe so the next quiet night has something waiting. That can wait until morning. For now, just let the words fade. Let your breathing slow. Let the whole world go soft and far away. The theories will keep. The castle will keep. Sleep now. We'll walk through it all again another night, just like this, slowly, in the dark, with nowhere to be and nothing to hold on to. Good night.